The river came back before Mara was ready to admit what her family had taken. It woke her in the dark with a sound too deep to be rain. She sat up in the narrow room above the workshop, listening as the window glass trembled in its frame. For one foolish second, she thought the mill had started by itself. Outside, dawn was lifting cold and blue over the bare maples. Mara pulled on her dark teal waxed canvas jacket, shoved her braid beneath her rust wool cap, and ran down the stairs. Water covered the stone apron. It rushed in from the upstream right, black beneath a skin of steel blue light, pouring through the long, dry headrace toward the covered wheel bay. Snow survived in clean white scraps along the bank. The gristmill stood across the channel, all weathered brown boards and wet stone, with one amber lamp glowing in the attached workshop. Mara waded to the iron headgate lever and gripped it with one gloved hand. Mud streaked the metal. The gate did not move. Neither did the wheel. She stared at the current forcing its way toward the silent bay and heard her grandmother's voice as clearly as if Ruth Bennett stood behind her. Water remembers where it was useful. Then a section of bank collapsed with a splash, and Mara understood that the river had not returned to save the mill. It might tear the place apart first. She let go of the lever and jumped back as brown water boiled through the gap. A spruce limb spun once in the current and struck the outer wall with a crack that traveled through the stone under her boots. "No," Mara said. The river did not seem embarrassed. She ran into the workshop where the lamp threw a warm circle over Ruth's old bench. The room smelled of wet wool, cold iron, and the mouse nest Mara had found but not yet had the nerve to remove from an empty coffee tin. She snatched a flashlight, coil of rope, pry bar, and the canvas tool bag she kept packed for maintenance calls. When she came back out, another clump of bank was gone. The old headrace had been dry longer than Mara had been alive. Alders had grown in it. Grass had covered the upper stones. Ruth used to point out the shallow depression from her truck and say, "There she is," as if the buried race were a sleeping animal. Now it was carrying half a river. Mara picked her way along the edge, boots sliding on mud. At the upstream mouth, water shoved through a new breach in the gravel bar that had separated the abandoned bend from the main channel. During the night, rain had eaten the snowpack off the hills and brought down everything the ground could not hold. The river had found the old low place beside the mill and taken it without asking anybody's permission. She looped the rope around a maple trunk, clipped it to her belt, and crawled onto the first course of exposed stone. The water was not deep there, but it was fast enough to knock her sideways. She used the pry bar to drag free a tangle of branches collecting against the race wall. The branches came loose all at once. She fell to one knee, plunged an arm into water up to the shoulder, and lost the pry bar. It vanished so cleanly she almost laughed. Perfect. Her phone began buzzing inside her jacket. She ignored it and worked her way back to solid ground. The left sleeve of her jacket had turned nearly black. Her glove poured water when she clenched her fist. The phone stopped, then started again. Mara took it out with numb fingers. Owen filled the screen. Of course it was Owen. Owen called twice when he wanted something, and once when he wanted credit for having called. She answered. "What? Good morning to you, too. The river's in the headrace." There was a pause. "Is that bad?" Mara looked at the wall of water hammering toward the mill. "No, Owen. The trout are delivering breakfast. I'm serious. So am I. It breached the gravel bar. I've got water against the foundation and debris stacking up by the bay. Okay, what do you need me to do?" The question was so unexpected that she nearly gave him an honest answer. Then he added, "Because the purchasers are doing their final walkthrough tomorrow, and Diane says anything below the road is technically your responsibility now." Mara closed her eyes. Cold water ran from her sleeve to her elbow. The farm rose beyond the county road, mostly hidden from the mill by the slope. Even from where she stood, she could see the roof of the red equipment barn and the top of the maple beside the farmhouse. For 5 generations, the farm and mill had shared the Bennett name. On paper, they had not shared a boundary in 87 years. That distinction had suddenly become sacred to everyone except Mara. "Tell the purchasers not to walk through a flood," she said. "They're walking through the house. Then unless the house has rolled downhill, they should be fine." Mara. Another branch struck the mill. She flinched. "I have to go." "Wait, is the county road in danger?" "No." "The culvert?" "I don't know." "Could the water back up onto the lower field?" "The lower field. Not the mill. Not her. I don't know, Owen." He exhaled in the way he did when someone else's failure to know a thing inconvenienced him. "Diane thought we should document everything." "Then tell Diane to come down here with a camera and hip boots. You don't have to make every conversation a fight." She looked at the rushing water. "I'm not the one making noise." She ended the call and shoved the phone away. The cold had begun to bite through her wet sleeve. She went back inside, stripped off the jacket, and hung it from a nail near the little propane heater. The heater clicked twice before catching. Ruth had hated it and claimed it sounded untrustworthy. "Anything that hesitates before a fire is thinking too hard," she used to say. Mara had spent 3 weeks since the funeral discovering how thoroughly a dead person could remain in a room. Ruth was in the pencil, worn flat on one side so it would not roll off the bench. She was in the jelly jar full of bent screws because a bent screw still knows how to be a hook. She was in the patched leather apron Mara had not moved from the back of the chair. She was not in the farmhouse anymore. The sale had closed Thursday at a lawyer's office in town, although Diane called the gathering afterward a family supper. They ate pot roast from Diane's blue Dutch oven at the same dining table, where Ruth had taught Mara to play cribbage badly and bluff well. The buyers would take possession at the end of the month. Diane wanted time to clear the last closets, which meant she wanted time to decide what counted as family property and what counted as trash without Ruth there to contradict her. Owen had stood to make a toast. "To keeping what matters," he said, raising a wine glass in the farmhouse they had just sold. Mara had watched the red line of wine tilt against the glass. Shouldn't that be liquidating what matters? Diane had set down her fork. Owen's smile remained, though it changed jobs. "I mean the memories. Good. Those don't need a roof." "Mara, please," Diane said. "Tonight has been difficult for everyone." Diane always spoke as if pain were a casserole she had portioned fairly. Mara had received the mill parcel because Ruth's will separated it from the farm and named her as its beneficiary. Diane described that fact as though Ruth had tucked a winning lottery ticket into Mara's coat pocket. She did not mention the insurance premium due in 26 days, the failed sill beneath the grinding floor, or the estimate for replacing the workshop roof Mara had already patched twice. Owen received a share of the farm proceeds large enough to erase the remainder of his mortgage. Diane took her administrator's fee and her share as Ruth's surviving daughter. Mara got 6/10 of an acre, a timber building with a stone foundation, and machinery that had not turned since the first Bush administration. "You're the only one who loves it," Owen had told her. He meant it kindly. That had been the worst of it. Mara had left before Diane served apple crisp. She walked downhill in freezing rain with Ruth's workshop key in her pocket and slept above the mill because returning to the farmhouse would have required accepting an apology no one had made. Now, less than 48 hours later, the river was back. She changed into Ruth's old green raincoat while her jacket dried, then dragged 2 orange traffic cones from beneath the workbench. They had "Property of Caldwell Public Works" stenciled on them, though Ruth had always claimed they were gifts. "Caldwell doesn't give gifts," Mara once said. Then they should guard their cones. Mara placed them near the weakest part of the apron, where a seam had opened between stones. It was a ridiculous gesture. The river had already ignored several 1,000 pounds of gravel. Orange plastic was unlikely to shame it into good behavior. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Diane. Mara answered on speaker while hauling sandbags from the lean-to. "Owen says you have flooding. I have a river. Is the building safe?" "Not sure yet." "Well, don't go inside if it isn't." Mara stopped with a bag against her hip. Thank you, that clears it up. I am trying to help. Come hold this end. Diane went quiet. Behind her, Mara heard a cupboard close. Diane was probably in Ruth's kitchen, sorting dishes into piles. I don't own boots for that sort of thing, she said. Ruth kept a pair by the mudroom. Those were thrown away. The soles were splitting. Mara set the sandbag down harder than necessary. Diane continued, if this makes the property uninhabitable, there may be options. What options? Don't take offense before I've said anything. I'm saving time. The buyers asked whether they might acquire the lower parcel as a buffer. They weren't interested before because of the condition, but circumstances change. Outside, water struck the wheel bay with another hollow boom. The buyers had not yet slept one night on Bennett land, and Diane was already discussing how neatly Mara might be removed from below it. You told them about this? I told them there was unusual runoff. They can see the weather, Mara. It isn't runoff. Whatever the technically correct term is, the river changed course. Diane made a small, impatient sound. Rivers do not simply change course overnight. Mara looked through the window at the current pouring over stones that had been buried yesterday. Come look, I have an entire house to inventory, and I have an entire river to argue with. I'm not arguing. No, you're selling. Mara. She ended the call. For several seconds she stood with both hands pressed to the bench. The heater ticked behind her. On the far wall, a row of rusted mill picks hung beneath Ruth's careful labels, each word written in block letters on yellowing masking tape. Mara had spent years believing work was a language her family understood. She had fixed porch rails, thawed pipes, changed tractor belts, climbed onto the mill roof while Owen held the ladder and told her to be careful. They thanked her. They praised her. They called her dependable. Then they divided the estate and paid her in everything that still needed fixing. A sharp, cracking sound brought her head up. She ran outside. A whole raft of brush had lodged at the mouth of the covered wheel bay. Water piled against it, rising over the lowest stones. The wheel was hidden in darkness behind the slatted enclosure, but Mara could picture every damaged bucket and iron fitting. If the jam forced the current sideways, it could undermine the workshop corner Ruth and Mara had spent 2 summers shoring up. Mara grabbed the rope again, then stopped. The lost pry bar was gone. The bank was less stable than it had been 20 minutes earlier. Her left hand was still shaking from the cold. Ruth had also taught her that stubbornness was only admirable until it made extra work for the ambulance crew. Mara took out her phone and scrolled to a number she had not called since the funeral. Elias Ward answered after 6 rings. If you're selling me something, he said, I already have 2 of it and neither works. It's Mara. His voice changed. What happened? The river came back. There was a short silence. Not disbelief, recognition. How much water? Enough to reach the wheel bay. I've got debris jammed against it, the upper bank's coming apart, and I lost my good pry bar. Your good one or Ruth's good one? Ruth's. That woman will come back just to complain. Mara looked toward the amber workshop lamp still burning against the blue morning. I know. Don't get in the race again, Elias said. She heard a chair scrape, then the clatter of something heavy falling over. I'm putting on my boots. How soon can you be here? As soon as an old man can drive without becoming another flood hazard. The line went dead. Mara stood alone on the wet apron, watching the river enter the mill's old stones as if it had never left. The wheel remained motionless in its dark bay. The building creaked around it, not awake, not saved, only being asked a question no one had prepared it to answer. Mara picked up the first sandbag and carried it toward the failing bank. The third sandbag split before Mara reached the bank. Wet sand spilled over her boots and filled the seam she had meant to block. She stared at it, too tired to decide whether this counted as success. A truck horn sounded from the county road. Elias Ward's old Ford came downhill at a speed that suggested either urgency or brake trouble. He turned onto the mill track, bounced through a rut, and stopped beside the workshop with his headlights on. A wooden toolbox slid across the bed and struck the tailgate. Elias climbed out wearing yellow rain pants, a brown canvas coat, and the expression of a man arriving late to an argument he expected to win. He was broad through the shoulders despite the stoop age had put in his back. White whiskers covered his chin unevenly, as though he had shaved by listening. He took one look at Mara's soaked trousers. "You went in. I was tied off. That wasn't the instruction I gave. You hadn't given it yet. I've known you since you were 9. It was a standing instruction." He walked past her to the edge of the race. The humor left his face. Water had risen another inch against the wheel bay. The jam of brush shuddered with every pulse, catching smaller debris until it had become a woven wall. Elias crouched above the stonework and watched the current. He did not speak for almost a minute. Mara's patience lasted 15 seconds. "Well? I'm deciding whether to insult you before or after we keep the corner from washing out." "After. I've had enough conversation this morning." "Good choice." He pointed toward the clogged bay. "We don't pull from the front. That lets the whole mess go at once, and it'll take one of us with it." "I know. Then stop looking at that rope like you plan to disagree." He returned to the truck and unloaded a hand winch, 2 lengths of chain, a steel cable, and a pair of chest waders patched in 3 colors. One knee was silver duct tape. "Those safe?" Mara asked. "No. That's why you're wearing them." Elias handed her the waders, then leaned into the truck again. "What are you wearing?" "The wisdom of age." "You forgot to pack it." "I've got another pair." They worked from the downstream side, where the stone apron gave them footing above the tail race. Elias anchored the winch to the thick maple Mara had used earlier and ran the cable through a snatch block to change the angle. He made her check every connection. "Again," he said. "I checked it." "Check it like somebody you dislike rigged it." She tugged the chain, inspected the hook, and reset the latch. "Happy?" "No, less nervous." The difficult part was getting a loop around the outer edge of the brush without entering the current. Elias produced a 12-foot pike pole from his truck, the kind of object Mara suspected he carried because he had spent his life waiting for circumstances to justify it. She lay on her stomach at the edge of the apron while he held the back of her belt. "If you pull my pants off," she said, "let me drown." Ruth would haunt me. Ruth would laugh first. She could do both. Mara reached with the pole. The hook caught a forked limb near the top of the jam. She drew it close enough to pass the cable loop around it, then scrambled backward. They tightened the winch one slow click at a time. The cable rose from the water, humming. Branches bent. Mud and leaves squeezed through the jam. "Easy," Elias said. "We're trying to peel it, not declare war." A limb snapped free and skated across the stones. The remaining brush shifted but held. The water level against the bay dropped 1/2 inch. Mara breathed. They repeated the process. Each pull removed only a few branches. It took nearly an hour to open a narrow path beside the wall, but the current began slipping through instead of climbing over itself. Elias watched where it exited beneath the bay. "The tail race is taking it," he said. "For now." "For now" is a respectable amount of time during a flood. He would not let her touch the headgate lever. The iron arm stood near the inlet, fixed at an angle above the water, its pivot buried under silt and roots. Ruth had told Mara the gate itself had been lowered before the headrace went dry, but no one knew what condition it was in beneath the mud. "If we break that arm," Elias said, "we may get a gate we can't raise or lower. That's worse than one we can't do either. It's letting water through. The gate might have rotted away, or the river came around it. Can we find out? When the river isn't trying to sit in your lap." He walked to the wheel bay and opened the narrow inspection door above the flooded lower sill. Mara had replaced its hinges the previous summer. In the dimness, the old wheel stood like the ribs of some enormous animal, black timber rimmed with iron. Water rushed below it, foaming around the damaged buckets. The wheel trembled but did not turn. Mara stepped beside Elias. "It wants to." "No," he said. "You want it to." She looked at him. "That shaft hasn't turned in 30-some years. Bearing could be seized. Wheel could be racked against the frame. If it moves under this load, it may tear the mounts out of the foundation. So we keep the water away. We keep as much of it away as the river allows. Together, they laid plywood over the lowest opening and braced it from the stone apron, not to stop the current, but to keep floating debris from striking the wheel. Elias examined the workshop corner where water had begun scouring dirt from beneath a capstone. He showed Mara how to angle the sandbags back from the wall, creating a broad curve instead of a narrow barricade. "You don't fight water by standing in front of it," he said. "You give it somewhere less expensive to go. That a millwright saying? That's a man with a failed first marriage saying." Mara almost smiled. "Which one?" "The one who got the house." They dug a shallow relief path toward the tail race, cutting through sod and old flood silt, so water overtopping the race would travel away from the workshop. Elias's movements were economical until they weren't. Twice he stopped with a hand pressed to his lower back. The second time, Mara took the shovel from him. "I'm fine. You're shaped like a question mark. It's a thoughtful posture. Sit down. I did not drive here to supervise. You've been supervising since you got out of the truck." He gave her an offended look, then sat on an overturned bucket near the wall. Mara dug, while he told her the channel was too shallow, too steep, crooked in the wrong place, and generally the sort of ditch built by a woman angry at dirt. When the relief path finally carried a thin stream toward the tail race, Elias stopped criticizing it. The sky had cleared completely. Sun struck the wet mill roof and turned every drip white. Across the road, the lower farm field lay gray and flattened beneath melting snow, undisturbed by the return channel. A black SUV slowed on the road. Mara recognized Diane's vehicle before it turned in. Diane parked well above the mud and remained behind the wheel for a moment, taking in the race, the damaged bank, and Elias sitting on the bucket. She emerged in a cream-colored coat and leather ankle boots, wholly unsuited to the ground. "I came," she announced. Elias lifted one hand. "We were starting to think fashion had won." Diane looked down at her boots. This was not what Owen described. "Owen hasn't seen it," Mara said. "He showed me the photograph you sent. I didn't send him one." Diane's mouth tightened. "Then he showed me something else." Mara suspected a news photograph of flooding in another county, which would have been typical of Owen's approach to evidence. Diane stepped carefully between puddles. At 60, she still had Ruth's straight posture and dark, steady eyes, but she wore resemblance like a suit she had tailored to remove every impractical seam. Her gray hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. Not one strand had accepted the weather. She stopped at the headrace. "Oh," she said. The single word contained more honesty than anything she had said on the phone. Mara waited for a warning about liability or resale. Instead, Diane moved nearer the bank until mud touched the edge of her boots. "Your grandmother said it couldn't come back. She said it probably wouldn't." Same thing, in Ruth language. "No," Elias said. "Nothing was ever the same thing in Ruth language." Diane ignored him. Her gaze followed the water toward the mill, and for a moment she looked younger and more tired. "When I was small, the wheel still turned." Mara had never heard her say that. "Do you remember it?" "I remember the noise. I hated sleeping here because the whole building seemed to breathe through the floor." Diane folded her arms. "Mother told me it was only machinery. Then she sat awake with me until morning. The river filled the silence between them." Mara wanted to ask why Diane had never told her. She wanted to ask how someone could remember the mill breathing and still hand it over like a bag of spoiled clothes. Before she chose, Diane's attention shifted to the eroded corner. "What will this cost?" There she was. "I don't know yet. And who determines whether the new channel stays?" "The river," Elias said. "I mean, officially, the river won't care about that either." Diane looked at Mara. "You need someone qualified." "Elias is qualified. For the building, perhaps. This is environmental." Elias stood with some effort. "She's right. Diane blinked, deprived of the argument she had prepared. He brushed dirt from his rain pants. If the breach holds, it changes flow through the old bend. Bank work, intake work, any gate she touches, there are rules. Conservation District should see it before Mara starts moving stone. I've moved 6 sandbags, Mara said. Then prepare your defense. Diane glanced at the workshop. The buyers may need to know. The buyers bought the farm, Mara said. Not this. If access is affected, it isn't. If the road, it isn't. You cannot know that after one morning. Neither can you. Diane's eyes sharpened. That is exactly my point. Mara felt the old reflex rise. Explain every detail. Prove she had considered every danger. Earn the right to be taken seriously. She looked down at Diane's boots instead. The leather was dark with mud now. Diane had come, even if she had come carrying the same doubts. We'll call the Conservation District, Mara said. We'll document the breach. We won't alter the channel until someone looks at it. Diane seemed surprised by the lack of resistance. Good. That doesn't mean I'm selling. I did not come to discuss that. You did this morning. This morning I thought the building might be washing away, so you wanted to sell it quickly? Diane stared at her. Elias picked up the bucket and moved several yards away with elaborate discretion. I wanted you to have an option, Diane said. An option is something you offer before everyone else decides it's the sensible thing. Diane's cheeks reddened, whether from cold or anger, Mara could not tell. She stepped back from the race. I have work at the house. So do I here. Yes, Diane said. You always do. She turned toward her SUV, slipping once in the mud and refusing Mara's outstretched hand before Mara had fully decided to offer it. After she drove away, Elias returned carrying the bucket. That went well. Mara watched the SUV climb toward the county road. Your failed marriage set a low standard. Useful thing. A low standard. Makes room for achievement. He took out his phone, squinted at the screen, and found a number. Who are you calling? Nora Patel, County Conservation District, knows rivers, permits, and the difference between a landowner in trouble and one about to cause some. Which am I? That depends on whether you touch that lever after I leave. Mara looked toward the mud-streaked iron arm. Beyond it, cold water ran between the exposed stones with relentless purpose. Elias raised the phone to his ear. Nora, he said when she answered. I've got something down at the Bennett mill you're going to accuse me of exaggerating. He listened, then handed the phone to Mara. She wants to hear it from the landowner. The words struck more deeply than it should have. Mara took the phone while the mill stood dripping behind her, and the returned river pressed past the motionless wheel. This is Mara Bennett, she said. I think I need help. Nora asked questions Mara had not thought to answer. How wide was the breach? Was the new channel carrying clear water or sediment? Had any mature trees gone down? Was the current entering the headrace directly or spreading through the old bend first? Had Mara placed anything in the water? Only my left arm. That wasn't a recommendation. It wasn't intentional. Is it injured? Just cold. Keep it that way. Don't enter the channel again, don't touch the gate, and don't move stone from either bank. I can be there around noon. Mara looked at the race. What do I do until then? Photograph everything from dry ground, especially the breach and any active erosion. If the building is in immediate danger, protect the structure without narrowing the channel. Sandbags along the foundation are fine, no equipment in the water. What if it rises? Call emergency management and get out. The simplicity of that instruction irritated Mara. This is my home. That makes it harder to leave, not safer to stay. Nora's tone was not unkind. It had the clean edge of someone who had learned that politeness could become permission. I'll see you at noon, she said. When the call ended, Elias nodded toward Mara's phone. I like her. You like anyone who tells me not to do things. No. Sometimes I pay people. He stayed until the water stopped climbing. They moved more sandbags, braced the workshop corner, and photographed the reopened bend from every angle Mara could reach without stepping into mud deeper than her ankles. Elias insisted on including a yardstick in several pictures. "For scale," he said. "The river isn't going to court. Everything goes to court if you photograph it badly enough." By 10, the current had cleared much of the loose silt from the headrace. Rows of fitted stone emerged beneath the water, straighter and more intact than Mara expected. The race was not a ditch, but a built thing, its shape still present under decades of roots and weeds. She crouched beside it, careful to keep both feet on the apron. Ruth had described the stonework many times. The upstream wall had been rebuilt after the flood of 1927. The deeper center channel was deliberate. A notch near the bend had once taken an overflow board. Mara had listened while patching windows or sorting bolts, storing each fact without imagining she would ever see the race carry water. Now the current revealed Ruth's descriptions one by one. Elias came up behind her with 2 mugs. Coffee. She took one. It was weak, overly sweet, and hot enough to hurt. "What did you put in this?" "Coffee." "What else?" "Optimism. Tastes expired." He lowered himself onto the stone ledge beside her. For a while, they watched twigs spin through the open path they had made beside the wheel bay. "Could it turn?" Mara asked. Elias rubbed his thumb over the rim of his mug. "The wheel?" "No, the gift shop Diane will want me to open. It would have to sell tiny jars of Vermont air, locally sourced disappointment. Tourists love that." She waited. Elias studied the covered bay. "There's enough water to turn something. That's not the same as saying it can turn what's there. What would it take? A proper inspection after the level drops. Shore the grinding floor, unload the shaft, open the bearing boxes, check the wheel frame for twist, replace buckets, probably more than half. Maybe the axle ends, if rot got behind the iron. How much? Work or money?" "Both. Too much." Mara glanced at him. "That's the honest answer," he said. "People ask what an old machine needs because they want a number they can either afford or reject. Old machines don't know numbers. They know which part fails after you fix the part in front of it. You said some of the machinery might be sound. It might. And you said Ruth kept the frame straight. She did. So it isn't impossible." Elias sighed into his coffee. "That word gets people hurt almost as often as possible." The rear door of the workshop banged in a gust. Mara stood to close it, then noticed Elias still watching the water. "Why did you stop coming?" she asked. He looked up. "Coming where?" "Here. You used to visit Ruth every week. Then last summer, hardly at all." His gaze dropped to the mug between his hands. "She told you I was busy. She lied badly. Ruth believed confidence improved accuracy." "What happened?" Elias turned the cup slowly. "She wanted me to tell her what it would take to run the line shaft again. I told her the river wasn't coming back, and electrifying the old system made no economic sense. She said that wasn't the question." "That sounds like her. I said some things about keeping a corpse standing because she was afraid to bury it." Mara felt her jaw tighten. "I knew they were cruel while I was saying them," he continued. "That didn't slow me down nearly enough." "What did she say? Asked me to leave my key." Mara looked toward the mill. The upper windows reflected pale sky, hiding the dark grinding floor behind them. "She never told me. She was protecting my reputation." "No. She was protecting herself from having to explain why it hurt." Elias accepted that without defense. "Did you apologize?" "Not in time. The river worked at the stones below them." Mara thought of the funeral, Elias standing at the back of the small church in a jacket that did not fit across his shoulders. He had left before the meal downstairs. "You came today," she said. "That's not the same." "No." It was not forgiveness, but he nodded as if she had given him something. Nora Patel arrived 11 minutes before noon in a county conservation district pickup with a magnetic logo on the door and mud-dried halfway up both sides. She appeared to be in her late 30s with dark hair pulled through the back of a faded blue cap. She wore chest waders without patches and carried a measuring rod, a tablet in a waterproof case, and a canvas field bag. She introduced herself to Mara, greeted Elias with, "What did you exaggerate this time?" and walked straight past the mill toward the upstream bend. Elias looked wounded. "My accuracy is legendary. Legends are not generally subject to verification." Mara followed them along the high edge of the channel. Nora stopped often, but never for long. She photographed exposed soil, marked the water line on her measuring rod, and pushed a steel probe into the bank. At the breach, she stood with her hands on her hips, watching the main river divide around the gravel bar. "Did you ever see water in this bend before?" she asked. "Some standing water after storms," Mara said. "Nothing moving. Old aerials show it as a secondary channel. The gravel bar built up after bank armoring farther upstream changed how sediment settled. Last night's flow cut through the lowest section. Will it close again? It might." The answer dropped heavily. Nora crouched and picked up a handful of gravel, letting it run between her fingers. "But this isn't a little overflow scratch. The breach has a defined bed already, and the old bend gives the water an easier path at this level. If the next few high flows widen it without shifting the bar back, the channel may persist." Mara glanced toward the mill downstream. From here, its roof rose above the bare trees, so the river has changed course. Partly. Most flow is still in the main channel. Right now, this is a reactivated side channel. Partly sounds temporary. It sounds accurate. Elias smiled. "Told you I liked her." Nora walked back along the bend, explaining that the water itself was not Mara's possession merely because it crossed her parcel. She could protect the mill from immediate damage. She could clear loose debris threatening the structure if she did it from the bank. She could not deepen the channel, build a dam, or force additional flow into the race. "What about the head gate?" Mara asked. "What's left of it will need to be assessed. If you eventually want a controllable intake, there are low-impact designs. A narrow diversion, seasonal limits, screening, a bypass for aquatic movement. But design comes after we understand how the channel settles. And permits." "How many?" Nora gave her a sympathetic look. "Enough that you'll want coffee before we make the list." They reached the eroded workshop corner. Nora approved the curved sandbag line and the shallow relief cut after confirming it ended in the existing tail race. She marked 2 places where Mara could drive stakes above the active bank and recommended straw wattles once the ground thawed enough to seat them. No loose hay bales, no concrete chunks, no borrowing stone from the race because it looked convenient. "People always borrow from the place they're trying to protect," Nora said. "That sounds familiar," Mara murmured. "What?" "Nothing." Nora entered the wheel bay through the inspection door but stayed on the dry upper sill. She shone her flashlight across the old wheel, the seized shaft, and the water passing beneath. "You're not running this today," she said. "It couldn't run today," Elias replied. "I like redundant safety." Mara stood behind them. If the channel holds, could a lawful intake produce enough flow to use? Nora did not answer immediately. She aimed the light at the lower buckets, then toward the race entrance. Possibly. Historically, this mill was built for a larger diversion than anyone would approve now. You would be working with a fraction of that. Whether the fraction is useful depends on the wheel, the head difference, seasonal flow, and what you expect it to do. Grind grain. The words came out before Mara had decided to say them. Elias turned. Nora lowered the flashlight. "Commercially?" "I don't know." "How much grain?" "I don't know." "Who for?" "I don't know yet." Nora's expression softened without becoming indulgent. "Then those are better first questions than how many permits." Mara felt foolish and strangely exposed. A few hours of water had let her speak as if years of rust were a business plan. "I'm not saying it will happen." "No," Nora said. "You're asking whether the river made it conceivable." "Did it? It made water available? Everything else is still broken." Elias made a quiet sound that might have been agreement. Nora promised to send an emergency stabilization guide and return after the flow dropped. She would check historic channel data, notify the state river management contact of the natural breach, and help Mara avoid doing anything expensive that would later have to be removed. At her truck, she paused. "Where are you staying?" "Above the workshop." "Pack a bag. If the water reaches the top of the second stone course by the bay, you leave. It's falling. Rivers are famous for respecting trends right up until they don't." After she drove away, Mara and Elias stood beside the race. Sunlight had shifted across the water, turning its surface from steel blue to clear brown. Beneath it, the old fitted stones led toward the mill with unnerving certainty. Elias broke the silence. "Grain?" Mara crossed her arms. It was a gristmill. It was also built when men considered losing fingers part of the operating cost. "You're the one who said enough water could turn something." "I said something. You supplied a business, apparently." A vehicle door slammed uphill. Owen was walking down from the county road in polished brown boots, holding his phone out to record the channel. He stopped when he saw Mara watching. "Diane said it's worse than the picture," he called. Mara looked at the phone, then at her brother. "For once," she said, "Diane was right." Owen kept recording as he came down the track. "Put the phone away," Mara said. "I'm documenting. You're narrating." He lowered it a few inches. "The buyers want to understand the situation. The buyers can call me. They don't know you. They're buying the property across the road from mine. We don't need matching Christmas pajamas." Elias coughed into his fist, badly disguising a laugh. Owen reached the stone apron and looked down at his boots. They were not work boots, despite the leather and thick soles. They were the kind worn by men who wanted credit for having left pavement. Diane said someone from the county was here. "Conservation district," Mara said. "What did they say?" "That the breach is natural, the channel may stay, and I shouldn't alter it until they know how it settles." Owen turned his phone toward the headrace again. "Did she say whether the farm is exposed?" Nora inspected the mill parcel. "Did you ask?" "I was busy asking about the property I own." His mouth tightened. Owen was 32 and had perfected the look of an older brother discovering that birth order was no longer legally enforceable. "The closing documents require us to disclose material changes before possession," he said. "The farm didn't change. The river did. That's not funny. It wasn't a joke." He stepped closer to the edge. Water moved over the fitted stones, carrying strips of bark and one red mitten that had begun a journey with no visible owner. Owen watched it pass. "I don't remember this being open," he said. "It wasn't. I mean, ever." "Neither do I." "Then why did Grandma keep the gate?" "Because removing it would have cost money." Owen glanced toward the mill. She also thought it might matter again. Mara looked at him. "Did she tell you that?" "She told everyone that. We just didn't all take it literally." The old irritation rose so quickly, Mara felt it in her throat. "You mean you didn't believe her? I mean, I had other things going on. So did she. So did you. You chose this anyway." There it was, the family's favorite way to turn dependence into consent. If Mara stayed when someone needed help, then she had chosen the cost. If she objected later, she was pretending not to know what staying meant. Elias picked up the pike pole. "Owen, you here to inspect your sister or make yourself useful? I came to see whether the sale was at risk. Then you've completed the first assignment." Owen looked at Mara, perhaps expecting her to soften the insult. She pointed to the brush they had dragged from the wheel bay. "That needs to go above the flood line." He laughed once. "I'm not dressed for this. Neither is the river. You've got your system here. I'll be in the way." "Probably," Elias said. "We'll work around it." Owen stood for another moment, weighing dignity against departure. Then he slipped his phone into his coat, removed the coat, folded it carefully over a dry section of wall, and took hold of the thickest branch. He pulled it free of the pile. Mud sprayed across his pale blue shirt. Elias nodded. "Now you're dressed for it?" They worked without conversation at first. Owen carried branches uphill and stacked them beside the lean-to. He attacked the job as if speed could make it less humiliating, hauling too much at once and catching the limbs on every obstruction. The third load hooked one of the traffic cones and dragged it 20 feet. "Those belong to Caldwell," he said, untangling it. "Allegedly," Mara replied. "Grandma stole those?" "Borrowed." "For how long?" "Long enough that returning them would raise questions." His mouth twitched. Mara remembered how easily Owen used to laugh before every conversation became an argument about what a sensible person would do. She could not identify when that had changed. Perhaps it had happened gradually, the way rot traveled behind paint. When the brush was cleared, Elias sent Owen to bring a pry bar from his truck. "The red one." "Or the black one," Owen called. "The red. They're both red. The redder one." Owen returned with the correct tool, looking annoyed that he had succeeded. They eased up a plank, covering an old overflow notch near the race bend. The wood broke in the middle, revealing wet rot beneath its painted surface. Elias worked the pieces out carefully while Mara kept the loose fragments from entering the current. Once the notch was clear, a narrow sheet of water spilled into the relief path they had dug. The level against the workshop dropped another fraction. Owen watched the water change direction. That little opening did that? "That little opening was put there for a reason," Elias said. "How did you know?" "Ruth showed Mara. Mara showed me this morning." Owen looked at his sister. "Grandma never showed me. You never asked what it was." "I didn't know there was something to ask." Mara almost said that he had never wanted to know. The answer waited sharp and ready. Then she saw his shirt, wet with sweat beneath the arms despite the cold, and the mud across his chest. He was staring at the notch with something quieter than resentment. "She showed me because I was here," Mara said. Owen nodded once. "Right." It was not an apology. It did not erase anything, but it left no surface for the sharper answer to strike. Elias went inside to make another pot of his terrible coffee. Owen picked up his coat and found mud on one sleeve where a branch had brushed it. "Leah will kill me," he said. "Your wife owns a washing machine. She owns opinions about dry cleaning. You married above your station. Frequently." He tried to rub the mud away and made it worse. Mara let him. After a moment, he said, "I didn't decide what Grandma put in the will. No, you just agreed it was fair. I agreed it was what she wanted. You called the mill appropriate for me. You love it. Love isn't a currency, Owen. I know that. Do you?" He looked across the road toward the farm. Only the upper barn roof was visible from below. "My share clears most of the house," he said. "That isn't wealth. It's less debt. I didn't call you wealthy. You look at me like I stole something. You stood in Grandma's dining room and toasted the memories after selling every room they happened in." His face reddened. "What was I supposed to do? Keep a farm none of us could operate?" "I didn't ask you to keep it. You voted against the sale. I asked for 3 months to look at a lease." "With what money?" "I don't know. Maybe if you'd let me finish looking, the estate was paying taxes, insurance, heat. Diane had offers. Every month mattered, and every day I worked on this didn't. I never said that. You didn't have to. You assigned it a value of 0 and called me lucky to get it." "That's not what the appraisal said. The appraisal assumed someone would demolish the building." Owen looked toward the mill, its boards dark with rain, the roof line patched in 3 shades of metal. Would that have been wrong? Mara's hands went still. He saw it happen. "I mean financially. You always do." Elias opened the workshop door. "Coffee's ready." "No one asked," Mara said. "That has never stopped coffee." Owen checked the time on his phone. "I have to meet Diane at the house." "Of course." He put on his stained coat. "The buyers are coming at 3. I'll tell them the channel is confined below the road and being assessed. Tell them to contact me about my parcel. They're not trying to take anything from you. They asked Diane to buy it. They asked whether it was available. Before or after, she suggested I might need rescuing from it." Owen did not answer quickly enough. Mara gave a small laugh. "There it is. They want a buffer from future development." "What future development?" "A house, commercial use, whatever someone might do if you sell. if I sell to anyone except them. They're not villains, Mara. They're buying a farm and asking reasonable questions. Then they can ask the owner. Owen picked up his phone, then seemed to reconsider. He slid it into his pocket without taking another picture. At the track, he turned back. If the water rises tonight, call me. Why? So I can help. You have a walkthrough. That'll be over. So will the flood, probably. Mara. She wanted to punish him with refusal. She also remembered him hauling branches until mud soaked through his shirt. Fine, she said. Fine means you'll call. It means leave before we discover what your coat does in a wash cycle. He nodded as though they had reached a binding agreement and climbed toward the road. Elias handed Mara a mug. You two communicate like people throwing silverware in separate kitchens. We're improving. Nobody bled. Days young. The river continued to fall through the afternoon. By dusk, the water line had dropped below the mark Nora indicated, but Mara packed a bag anyway. She placed it beside the workshop door with Ruth's leather apron folded on top, then moved the apron back to its chair because taking it felt too much like expecting to lose the building. She checked the stone course every hour. At midnight, the amber lamp reflected in the headrace as a broken gold line. The wheel stood motionless beyond it. Mara listened from the inspection door, learning the difference between water striking timber and water passing beneath it. The mill creaked, settled, and held. She slept for 90 minutes at a time. In the morning, the breach still carried a strong current, but the exposed mud along the banks showed how far the flood had receded. Elias returned with breakfast sandwiches and a folding wooden rule. He found Mara sitting on the workshop steps with an envelope open in her lap. Bad news? He asked. Insurance renewal. That's redundant. The premium was higher than the estimate Diane had given during the estate meeting. Mara read the number again, hoping repetition might embarrass it into shrinking. Payment was due in 25 days. Elias sat beside her. Can you cover it? If nothing else happens. He looked toward the river. Something else is happening, he said. I noticed. He took the paper, read it, and returned it without offering false reassurance. We start with inventory, he said. Not dreams, not grain. We find out what the building needs to survive water beside it, then what the machinery needs to be safe. After that, you decide whether you're preserving a mill or trying to operate one. What's the difference? Time? Money, pain, and approximately every person you'll have to ask for help. Mara folded the insurance notice and tucked it into her jacket. And if I don't want to decide yet, you already called me. He unlocked the wide door to the grinding floor. Cold air came down from the darkness, carrying the smells of old flour, timber, and iron. Mara switched on her flashlight. Together they climbed the stairs. The first stair complained under Elias's weight. He stopped with one boot on it and looked back at Mara. You repaired this? 2 years ago. You repaired the tread. That was the part that broke. The stringers pulling away from the wall. That part hadn't broken yet. He stepped down again. From his toolbox, he took a drill, 2 long structural screws, and a square of plywood already scarred from other jobs. Mara held the stair in place while he drove the screws through the stringer into the wall post. You brought those because you knew? She asked. I brought those because this is a mill. What else did you bring? Lunch, if you continue being pleasant. They climbed with their weight near the wall. The grinding floor filled the older, taller section of the building above the wheel bay. Thin daylight entered through 6-paned windows furred with dust. 2 millstones sat inside their wooden housings near the center. The main line shaft ran beneath the ceiling, carrying iron pulleys of different sizes. Rotten belts hung from them in slack loops. Mara had been up there many times, but Elias made the room look newly dangerous simply by examining it. He did not touch anything at first. He stood still and listened. For what? Mara whispered. Complaints. From the building? From my knees. He handed her the folding rule and pointed toward a wide plank running across the floor. Measure from that post to the center of the stone housing. She stepped forward. His hand closed around the back of her jacket. Not there. Mara looked down. The boards beneath her boots appeared gray, but solid. Elias tapped one with the end of his cane-shaped moisture probe. The metal tip went through with a soft crunch. "Old flour holds damp," he said. "Then it holds rot. Keep to the joists until we mark a path." They laid spare planks across the safest sections and drew red chalk lines where the floor could not be trusted. Mara measured while Elias recorded numbers in a pocket notebook. His handwriting leaned in every direction as if each word had been startled. The nearer millstone housing was swollen at the base. One corner had dropped enough to put the drive spindle out of alignment. Elias knelt, removed an inspection board, and shone his flashlight inside. "Stone's probably fine," he said. "Furniture isn't." Furniture. Case, shoe, hopper. Anything wooden that isn't the building. You could say that. I did. He reached in and brought out a handful of brown powder. It smelled faintly sour. Old grain? Old mice, mostly. Mara backed away. "I thought you were attached to the history." "Not all of it." At the main shaft, Elias showed her how to inspect the bearing blocks without placing her fingers where they could be trapped. The shaft was 8 inches thick, dark wood bound at intervals with iron collars. Rust marked the lower edge of the nearest bearing cap. "Take the load off before you ever try to move this," he said. "Belts first, then disengage each machine." We turn by hand with control from both sides. Could we do that today? No. Why? Because I just explained the 3 things that happened before it. We can remove belts. We can photograph belts, label belts, and decide which rotten belt is least likely to drop a pulley on our heads. You make restoration sound festive. It becomes festive when somebody brings pie. He moved to the great wooden gear below the stone drive. Its teeth were separate blocks fitted into the rim, each one held by a wedge. Several were split or missing, but most remained in place beneath a crust of old grease and flour dust. Elias scraped one gently with the back of his knife. Pale wood appeared. "Apple," he said. "For a gear? For replaceable teeth. Hard, close grain. Wears before the big wheel does." Mara rubbed the cleaned surface with her thumb. The wood was smooth under the grime. Ruth said Granddad replaced 6 of those. He did 4. Ruth did the other 2 after he got tired of being corrected. "You helped?" I sharpened tools and received criticism. That sounds like helping, Ruth? On the gear rim beside one of the newer teeth, a date had been penciled in small block numbers. May 14th, 98. Under it were the initials RB. Mara touched them without thinking. Ruth's hands had been steadier then. Mara pictured her fitting the applewood block, checking it twice, then writing the date where no visitor would ever see it. Not a message, not evidence, just maintenance left for the next person. Elias pretended to be interested in the bearing. They found more marks as they worked. Dates beside replaced boards. Arrows showing the direction wedges should be driven. A note in pencil behind a guard. Check after first run. No first run had followed. The river changed. Ruth's husband died. The farm stopped growing milling grain, and the mill became a building everyone meant to address later. The notes did not make the machinery valuable. They made its waiting visible. Near the outer wall, Elias removed a loose panel and found a series of thin hardwood shims beneath a bearing block. Each had been cut to a slightly different thickness. He whistled. "What?" Ruth brought the shaft back into line. "When? Can't tell. Not recent." He aimed the flashlight along the shaft. She'd have had to measure sag from the foundation to the upper frame, then adjust this bearing a hair at a time. She told me she'd leveled it. "And you believed her?" "I thought she meant the block." Elias sat back on his heels. "Your grandmother used ordinary words for large jobs. It confused people into thinking she wasn't bragging. The shaft remained seized, but it was straighter than the drop stone housing suggested. Elias checked it in 4 places, then measured again because he distrusted good news. "The frame is salvageable," he said at last. Mara searched his face. You're sure? I'm sure I used the word salvageable. That means yes. It means the patient has a pulse. Do not plan the parade. Her phone rang before she could answer. The name on the screen was Warren Pike, supervisor at the apartment complex where Mara handled maintenance 4 days a week. She stepped toward the window. Hey, Warren, tell me you're not underwater, only conversationally. I saw the river notice. You coming in today? Mara checked the time. She was already 40 minutes late. I texted last night. You texted that you might be delayed. Delayed and absent have different payroll codes. I'm sorry. The bank failed beside the mill. I know. I'm not trying to be a jerk. Warren always announced that just before making a strong attempt. Unit 27 has no hot water, he continued. The plumber can't come until Tuesday. Can you look at it? Today. That is generally when people want hot water. Mara looked across the grinding floor. Elias had begun tapping the wheel side bearing cap with the wooden handle of his hammer, listening to the sound. I can be there in an hour. You look like you've slept? Enough. That wasn't the question. I'll be there. She ended the call. Elias kept tapping. Go. I can stay another hour. You can also get fired in another hour. I need to finish the inventory. The mill has waited 30 years. It can survive your shift. The river hasn't. And Nora told you what level means leave. It's a long way below that. Mara slid the folding rule into his toolbox. Don't work alone. I'm going home. You just said the mill could wait. It can wait without me. They descended slowly. In the workshop, Mara found another envelope pushed beneath the door. Diane had written her name across the front. Inside was a list of items remaining at the farmhouse. Clothing, books, kitchenware, Ruth's cedar chest, framed photographs, 2 boxes marked Mara, and 1 marked Mill Records. Diane had divided everything into categories with deadlines beside them. Anything not collected by Monday would be donated or disposed of before the buyers took possession. Mara read the list twice. Problem? Elias asked. Apparently grief has business hours. He took the page. Cedar chest? Diane wants it. It was Ruth's. That's how estates work. I never cared for estates. You don't care for property until it becomes lumber. Lumber doesn't pretend. Mara folded the list and put it in the same pocket as the insurance notice. The 2 papers pressed together against her chest. Everything she had to save and everything she had to remove. Before leaving, Elias made her walk around the mill with him. The upstream corner needed immediate shoring. 2 lower clapboards had to come off so they could inspect the sill. The race wall showed new scour where water rounded the bend. Nora would need another photograph by afternoon. Lumber, Mara asked. For temporary bracing, 6 treated 6x6s, blocking, and enough plank to give us safe paths upstairs. Permanent work waits until we expose the damage. How much? Call the yard. She did from the truck. The figure the clerk gave her was more than half the insurance premium. Delivery cost extra. Mara asked them to hold the order until closing, thanked him, and ended the call. Elias leaned against the open truck door. You're thinking of spending the insurance money. I'm thinking of not letting the building fall into the river before I insure it. An uninsured building standing beside a river is still uninsured. A collapsed insured building becomes an argument. Correct. That's why this is unpleasant. Mara pressed her fingertips to her eyes. She had enough in checking to buy the lumber or pay the premium, not both. Another paycheck would arrive before the insurance deadline if Warren continued believing her absences belonged to the delayed payroll category. I can give you the 6x6s from my shop, Elias said. No, they've been stacked 3 years. No, I'm not offering charity. You replace them when you can. With what money? The future kind. That's charity with a calendar. It's a loan without paperwork. Worse. Elias's mouth flattened. Ruth helped me buy my first jointer. That was between you and her. No, it was between her and this mill. She said anyone using old wood should learn what old machines asked of it. Mara looked at him. I never paid that back, he said. not properly. She wanted to refuse because accepting would give weight to the mill, and weight could become obligation. She wanted to refuse because Diane already believed she would surrender once the costs became real. She wanted to refuse because owing Elias would make his hope part of hers. Instead, she said, "I'll replace them when the future money arrives, when I have it." Same mythical currency. He held out his hand. Mara shook it. At the apartment complex, she spent 3 hours draining rust-colored water from a heater, while an adult tenant named Mrs. Dorsey stood in the doorway offering theories and powdered donuts. The failed heating element came free only after Mara scraped her knuckles raw. Warren approved the replacement part but reminded her, gently and twice, that emergency leave was unpaid. By the time Mara returned to the mill, dusk had turned the river dark. Elias was gone. 6 heavy timbers lay stacked beneath the lean-to, covered with a tarp and weighted at the corners. On top sat his pocket notebook. Mara opened it under the amber workshop lamp. He had listed the machinery room by room, marking unsafe items in red and salvageable ones in blue. On the last page, he had written 3 lines: building first, water second, then ask the wheel. Mara carried the notebook upstairs. She stood on the safe planks, found the applewood gear tooth they had cleaned, and set both hands against the great wheel's rim. She did not push, not yet. But beneath the dust, the wood was solid and cool, waiting without making any promise it could not keep. A floorboard popped beneath her left boot. Mara stepped back onto the plank path so quickly her shoulder struck the gear. Dust came down from the rim and coated her cap. "Good judgment," she muttered to the empty room. "Excellent start." She carried Elias's notebook downstairs and left it on Ruth's bench. Before going to bed, she photographed the water line for Nora. The current had lost its flood-brown color. In the beam of her flashlight, it ran dark and surprisingly clear over stones that had not seen moving water for decades. The clarity made it look settled. The sound kept her awake anyway. Elias arrived after sunrise with the 6x6s on his trailer, pretending they had not already appeared beneath Mara's lean-to the previous evening. "You planning to unload those?" he asked. They unloaded themselves. Good lumbers motivated. He had also brought 2 adjustable steel posts, cribbing blocks, and a radio that received only a station devoted to farm prices and old country songs. They removed the lower clapboards from the upstream workshop corner. The timber sill behind them was black at the surface, but resisted Elias's awl until the last 3 feet. There, the tool sank almost to its handle. Mara stared at the hole. "How much do we cut out?" "Today? None." "You said we needed to expose it. We needed to know what we're supporting before we support it. Cutting is later." "When is later?" "When we have a plan that extends past making a larger hole." They placed cribbing beneath the sound section, then used the steel posts to take pressure off the damaged corner. Elias made Mara tighten each post only a quarter turn at a time. "Wood needs warning," he said. "It's had 130 years. Not about this." By late morning, the temporary braces stood in a fan beneath the workshop floor. They were ugly, obvious, and reassuring. Mara painted the exposed end grain with preservative, while Elias fastened a tarp above the open wall. A truck slowed on the county road. For a moment, Mara thought Owen had returned. It continued toward town. "You expected him?" Elias asked. "No." "You looked." "I look at traffic. You live beside a road. That must be exhausting." Her phone rang inside the workshop. Nora asked for another set of waterline measurements and said she would stop by after lunch. The main river dropped almost 2 feet at the gauge. She said, "How is your side channel?" "Still moving, steady or falling." Mara looked at the mark she had scratched into a stake the previous afternoon. It fell 4 inches overnight, maybe half an inch since breakfast. That suggests the channel remains connected at ordinary spring flow. Is that good? It's information. You and Elias should start a business. What would we sell? Caution. There's a strong market. Nobody pays. Nora laughed. Don't celebrate yet. I want to look at the downstream bank. Clear water can still scour. When she arrived, she walked the entire bend again. The breach had widened slightly, but its sides no longer collapsed with every pulse. Gravel from the bar had formed a shallow tongue, directing part of the main river into the old channel. Nora measured the head difference between the upstream race and the tail race, then checked it twice. "What does that tell you?" Mara asked. "That the builders understood gravity. Anything useful?" "There's enough fall to work with." "The question is how much flow the channel carries after snowmelt." Elias joined them beside the headgate. "Gate's probably gone below the sill." "Can you tell without excavation?" Nora asked. "Not honestly. I appreciate that qualification." He nodded toward Mara. "She's been training me." Nora paced the high bank and set 2 more stakes. "For now, keep documenting. The breach is behaving like a reactivated natural channel, not a temporary sheet of floodwater. That makes it more likely to persist." The words sent a cautious warmth through Mara. Nora saw it. "More likely is not guaranteed. I heard you. And persistence creates obligations. This bank is raw. The outside bend below the race is already losing soil. If the channel stays, it will need stabilization with live stakes, choir rolls, or another approved method. The intake will need to pass high water without directing it at your foundation. How much does that cost? Depends on design, volunteer labor, and whether you're protecting an inactive historic structure or proposing water-powered use." Mara rubbed preservative from her thumb. "I haven't proposed anything." "Then don't let Elias order a turbine. I prefer wheels," he said. "I know. You told 3 county commissioners. They asked. They were attending a retirement dinner." After Nora left, Mara checked the time. Diane's deadline at the farmhouse was less than 24 hours away. "I have to go uphill," she told Elias. "Funeral business, estate business, wearing funeral clothes." He glanced at the braced corner. "I'll finish the tarp. I said not to work alone. This is a ladder, not the main shaft. That sentence is how ladders kill people." He looked mildly proud. "You have been listening." Mara crossed the county road and walked up the farm drive rather than move her truck. The snow had melted from the ruts, exposing gravel and years of oil stains. A sold sign leaned beside the mailbox. Someone had attached a red banner beneath it. "Welcome home." The message was meant for strangers. Diane's SUV stood beside the farmhouse. Inside, every surface held a box. Pale squares marked the walls where pictures had hung. Without Ruth's copper pans, boots, seed catalogs, and half-finished cups of tea, the kitchen looked larger and cheaper. Diane was wrapping plates in newspaper. "You're early," she said. "For what?" "I expected you after work. You said before Monday. It is Sunday." "Exactly." Diane folded paper over a plate with precise, angry corners. "Your boxes are in the parlor. The mill records are beside them." Mara found 3 boxes, not 2. Diane had added Ruth's wool blankets and labeled them Mara Practical. The box marked mill records was heavier than it looked. Inside were operating ledgers, repair receipts, equipment manuals, tax assessments, and decades of notebooks tied in bundles with cotton string. No revelation waited on top, just Ruth's handwriting and the ordinary accumulation of keeping a place. Mara opened the newest notebook. Pages listed roof patches, stone pointing, window glazing, mouse damage, and materials bought with cash. Beside many entries, Ruth had written, "M. Helped." Mara closed it. Diane stood in the doorway holding a stack of framed photographs. "Those are yours if you want them." "Why?" "Because you're in most of them." One showed Mara and Ruth beside the workshop after replacing the west window. Both were adults, both squinting into the sun, Ruth holding a caulking gun like a weapon. Mara set it in her box. "Where's the cedar chest?" she asked. "Upstairs. You want it?" Diane's shoulders stiffened. "It was my grandmother's." "I know. You sounded accusatory. I was checking. I am permitted to keep something. So am I." Diane placed the remaining photographs on a chair. No one said otherwise, except anything not collected by tomorrow gets disposed of. That is a deadline. not a prohibition. It feels different when you have a mill threatening to fall into a river, which is why I tried to give you a clear schedule." Mara lifted the records box onto the table. "You could have waited. The purchasers take possession Friday. They have movers, they have insurance inspections. There are practical constraints. There always are when you want something finished, and there never are when you want something preserved." The sentence landed harder because Diane did not raise her voice. Mara studied her aunt. "Why do you hate that mill?" Diane stared toward the kitchen window. Through it, the upper pasture rolled toward woods glazed with meltwater. "I do not hate it. You assigned it to me because you thought I'd sell it. I administered Ruth's will. I did not assign her bequest. You encouraged me to accept the mill instead of challenging the valuation. And what would a challenge have accomplished? Legal fees? Delay? Owen accusing you of trying to take farm proceeds? Maybe I deserved a real conversation. You deserved not to lose 3 years proving a ruined building was worth less than the paper said. That was my decision." "No," Diane said. "It would have become everyone's decision paid for from the estate. That is what estates are, Mara. They turn grief into shared invoices." Mara looked down at the notebook. Diane pulled out a chair but did not sit. "Your grandmother spent money on that mill when the furnace here needed replacement. She patched its roof while borrowing to pay the farm taxes. After her hip surgery, she climbed those stairs alone because you were working, and she did not want you to know. She told you? I found her there." Mara pictured Ruth on the grinding floor, one hand on the loose rail, hiding pain behind impatience. "You could have told me. She made me promise not to. And you kept that promise but ignored everything else she wanted?" Diane flinched. "Do you think I enjoyed selling this place? I think you enjoyed deciding." For several seconds, the only sound was newspaper settling around the plates. Diane sat at last. "When your mother died, Ruth stopped opening bills. Owen was finishing college. You were trying to keep the mill roof from leaking with a blue tarp and roofing nails. I sorted the accounts. I negotiated with the bank. I sold 2 pieces of equipment no one used and was accused for 10 years of dismantling the heritage." Mara had known the facts separately. She had never heard Diane arrange them into a wound. "You protected everyone from debt," Mara said. "Someone had to. So you gave me the debt-shaped thing." Diane looked at the box of records. "I believed you would sell the parcel to the farm buyer, pay off the repairs you charged to your credit card, and have enough left for a deposit on a decent apartment. You planned my life. I wanted you to have one. I have one. You sleep above a workshop with no shower. The shower works when the pipes don't freeze." Mara pressed her palm against the box. The river might stay. Diane went still. "Nora says the old channel is likely to remain connected. There may be enough fall for limited power. And what will it cost to make any of that safe? I don't know. Who will pay? I don't know yet." Fear crossed Diane's face before she covered it with irritation. That is exactly how Ruth spoke. Mara understood then that Diane had not come down to the river only to measure danger to the sale. She had seen her mother's devotion beginning again in Mara and mistaken repetition for destiny. "I'm not Ruth," Mara said. "No." The word was soft, almost an apology. Mara carried the records and photographs to the porch. When she returned, Diane handed her a small ring holding 3 old keys. These were in Mother's desk. Mara recognized the upstairs cabinet key and the narrow brass key for the grain bin latch. The third had once opened the mill office before its lock was replaced. "You kept them?" "I forgot them." Diane's tone warned against making the gesture more tender than she could bear. Mara closed her fingers around the keys. "The cedar chest is yours. It was always mine. I know." Outside, Owen's truck turned into the drive, towing a utility trailer. He climbed out and looked from Mara's boxes to Diane through the kitchen window. "I thought you might need help moving things," he said. Mara glanced at his trailer, then toward the mill below the road, where Elias's tarp shone silver over the newly braced corner. Only if you're not dressed for it, she said. Owen looked down at his old jeans and work boots. I learn, he said. Owen backed the trailer close to the porch while Mara carried out the last box. Diane watched from behind the screen door, one hand resting on the frame. You're taking the blankets? She asked. You labeled them practical. They are. I'm trying something new. Diane looked as if she might smile, then remembered they were still disagreeing. Owen tied the boxes down with 3 ratchet straps. He tested each strap twice, pulling until the cardboard corners began to collapse. They're photographs, not bridge supports, Mara said. I don't want them blowing onto the road. Neither did Grandma. That's why she kept them inside. He loosened one strap. You want help or commentary? Help with commentary. I'll work on the package. As they drove downhill, Mara rode beside Owen with the box of mill records on her knees. Through the rear window, she watched the farmhouse recede. Diane remained on the porch until a curve hit her. Owen glanced at the box. Anything useful? Receipts? Manuals? Maintenance notes? No buried gold? Just invoices. That sounds more like Grandma. The sold sign passed beside Mara's window. Did you know Diane expected me to sell the mill to the buyers? She mentioned it. When? Before closing? Mara turned toward him. And you didn't? I thought she'd talk to you. That isn't an answer. Owen kept his eyes on the road. I thought it made sense. For whom? For you. You all keep saying that because you have credit card debt, Mara, because your truck payment is ridiculous, because you have no savings and a building that eats money. My truck gets me to work. I'm not saying you're irresponsible. You're reciting my finances from memory. It has a mood. He braked before the turn into the mill track. The trailer rattled behind them. I was worried, he said. Quietly, where it couldn't become help. What did you want me to do? Hand you part of my share? No, you would have hated that, yes. So, we agree. I wanted you to admit the mill wasn't generous. Owen parked near the lean-to and shut off the engine. The river filled the silence. I knew it wasn't, he said. Mara waited. He stared through the windshield at the silver tarp over the braced corner. I told myself you'd rather have a place than money, and I wanted the money. Both things can be true. The admission was too small for absolution and too honest to strike. Mara opened the door. The boxes go in the workshop. They carried everything inside. Owen placed the mill records beside Elias's notebook and noticed the insurance renewal beneath it. You can cover that? I have 24 days. That wasn't the question. Runs in the family. He picked up the notice, saw her expression, and put it down. I could loan you. No, I didn't even say how much. You could loan me enough to feel involved and then ask about it every time I make a decision you don't like. That's unfair. That doesn't make it wrong. Owen shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. Fine. Mara hated the disappointment in his face because it made refusal feel like cruelty. She reminded herself that accepting money was not the only way to accept a person. Elias and I are unloading the shaft Tuesday, she said. If you actually want to help, we need someone on the lower chain. Owen looked toward the stairs. Is that dangerous? Everything here has a preferred way to injure you. What time? 6 in the morning? No, we save unsafe work for after dark. He nodded. I'll be here. He arrived Tuesday at 5:53 with work gloves, coffee, and 4 breakfast sandwiches. Elias accepted the food as proof of character. They spent the first hour building a lifting frame over the main pulley. Elias had borrowed a chain hoist from his cabinet shop and inspected every link before letting Owen touch it. The rotten leather belts had to be cut away in sections, each one labeled and photographed before removal. Why preserve a rotten belt? Owen asked. Length, width, lacing pattern, Mara said. Elias pointed at her with his knife. Worth educating. You taught her all this in 3 days? Ruth taught her most of it over years. I'm making it sound official. They disengaged the stone drives and supported the heavy pulleys so their weight no longer twisted the shaft. Dust covered their clothes. Owen sneezed so violently that a pigeon left the rafters in protest. Near noon, Elias inserted a padded lever against the main gear. "Hands clear," he said. Mara checked Owen's position below, then set the second lever on her side. They took the pressure together. Nothing moved. They reset their grips. "Do not bounce it," Elias warned. "Steady pressure." Mara leaned in. Her shoulders strained. The gear remained fixed, every tooth holding the same shadow. Then a rusted bearing gave a dry, reluctant click. The shaft moved less than the width of a pencil line. Owen let out a breath. "Was that us?" "No," Elias said. "Ghost." Mara released pressure and crouched beside the bearing. A fresh line showed where iron had shifted against old grease. It moved. "A 16th, perhaps. You said it might be seized. It is seized. We have now proved it can be seized slightly to the left." She laughed before she could stop herself. They did not try again. Elias flooded the bearing edge with penetrating oil and wrote the date in his notebook. The tiny movement had exposed a bright curve of metal beneath the rust. Not healthy, not ready, but not fused into one useless mass. Owen touched the shaft with 2 fingers. This turned the whole floor? And equipment in the workshop below, depending on how they belted it, Elias said. Mill didn't make power for one machine. It distributed work. Mara looked from the shaft to the pulleys spaced along it. That was the thought that stayed with her. Not a wheel performing for visitors, but one system carrying motion where it was needed. Nora returned at the end of the week with a printed map and a request that Mara stop sending waterline photographs at midnight. "I review them in the morning," she said. "The river is not grading your punctuality. It's quieter then. That's because reasonable people are asleep." They stood upstream while Nora pointed out the channel's developing pattern. The side flow had decreased with the main river, but not disappeared. Water now entered the historic bend through a narrower, well-defined throat in the gravel bar. If this holds through lower summer flow, you may have a reliable seasonal source, she said. Not constant, not full capacity. A screened intake here could feed the existing stone race without blocking the channel. Mara studied the sketch Nora had made. A low structure would guide only part of the water toward a controllable headgate. High water would pass around it. Fish and debris could remain in the natural bend. Could we use the old lever? Possibly as part of the mechanism, if it's sound. The gate itself will likely be new. Who designs it? You'll need an engineer to stamp final plans if you pursue power. I can help you develop a preliminary concept that doesn't begin by violating 3 regulations. Generous. I'm known for romance. Nora's face became serious. Before you spend money on design, determine what the mill can use and whether anyone needs what it can produce. Historical operation is not a purpose. Mara heard Diane in the sentence and resented Nora for sounding more reasonable. Elias heard something else. "I know people," he said. "That is not always a recommendation," Nora replied. His cabinet shop occupied a converted dairy barn 2 miles north, warm with sawdust and heated by a stove that looked capable of burning furniture whole. The following evening, Elias invited 3 people to meet Mara around his scarred finishing table. June Avery owned a bakery in town and had forearms built by kneading dough. She listened with her arms crossed and asked whether the mill could produce food-grade flour. Eventually, Mara said, "If we rebuild the stone housings, create a clean processing area, and pass inspection." "When?" "I don't know." June nodded as if the answer improved Mara's credibility. "I use about 200 pounds of rye flour a month. More in winter. I'd test local if the grind is consistent." Tom Russ grew rye, buckwheat, and dry beans on leased fields along the valley. He wore a seed company cap and kept turning it backward and forward as he spoke. "I can sell grain," he said. "The problem is getting small lots, cleaned and milled without hauling them halfway across the state. But I can't promise acreage to a machine that doesn't exist." "Fair," Mara said. "You charging by weight?" "I haven't decided. You separating batches?" "I'd have to. What's your minimum?" "I don't know that either." Tom looked at June. "She's very prepared. She's honest, June said. It's rarer. The third person was Celia Moore, a furniture restorer who rented the rear half of Elias's shop and complained that his planer drew enough electricity to dim her lights. If the mill workshop had belt power, she said, what could it actually run? Elias answered before Mara could. At limited flow, a small planer, drill press, lathe, not all at once, seasonal schedule, so a cooperative shop. Possibly, Mara said. Celia tilted her head. Do you want a business or a rescue project? The question quieted the room. Mara thought of the insurance notice, the rotten sill, the river bank that now belonged to her responsibility. She thought of Ruth's initials beside an applewood tooth and Diane saying, that is exactly how Ruth spoke. I want to know if the mill can be useful, she said. If it can't, I need to learn that before usefulness becomes another word for love. June uncrossed her arms. Tom turned his cap forward. No one offered money. No one promised customers. They discussed sanitation, moisture, scheduling, insurance, grain storage, noise, and what happened during summer low water. The list grew longer, but it also became specific. Before leaving, June wrote her monthly rye usage on the back of a bakery receipt. Tom wrote the amount he might commit to a test batch if the stones could be dressed. Celia listed 3 machines that could work from a line shaft and 2 that should never be allowed near one. Mara carried the scraps back to the mill in her jacket pocket. Under the amber lamp, she laid them beside the insurance renewal and Ruth's notebooks. Need, cost, and history occupied the same small circle of light without solving one another. Outside, water moved steadily through the old headrace. For the first time, Mara did not hear it asking whether the wheel could turn. She heard it asking what the turning would be for. Mara taped the 3 scraps of paper to the wall above Ruth's bench. By morning, moisture had curled June's bakery receipt into a question mark. The question acquired numbers over the next several days. A replacement sill section, new floor planking, bearing work, wheel buckets, grain cleaning equipment, food-safe wall surfaces, engineering, permits, bank stabilization, insurance that would rise again if the mill became an operating business. Elias refused to let her total everything in one column. That's how you make sure the answer is no, he said. It is one building. It is 5 problems sharing a roof. Structure, water, power, milling, workshop. Put each on its own page. Then I get 5 opportunities to panic. More organized. They built a long table on a sheet of plywood. Beside each job, Mara wrote what had to happen first, what could be done with skilled volunteer labor, and what required someone licensed. The immediate structural work still exceeded what she had. On Thursday, she drove her truck to a dealership south of town during her lunch break. The salesman had a pink scalp, clean shoes, and an ability to call rust character when discussing vehicles he sold, and concerning corrosion when discussing hers. Mara owed less than the truck was worth, but not by much. After 2 hours, she left her 4-year-old pickup in his lot and drove away in a 12-year-old Ford with manual windows, a dented tailgate, and enough cash from the difference to pay the mill's insurance premium. The old truck smelled of pine cleaner and wet dog. When she pulled into the apartment complex, Warren came outside carrying a work order. You lose a bet? I improved my financial position. You got a tetanus booster? The frame's good, so is a shopping cart's until you take it on the interstate. She paid the insurance online from the maintenance office before her nerve changed its mind. The confirmation screen brought less relief than expected. She had protected the mill for a year and traded away 3 years of dependable transportation to do it. On the drive home, the Ford's heater worked only on its highest setting. Mara arrived with frozen feet and a face hot enough to cook on. Elias was waiting beside the workshop. You sell the truck? Why does everyone sound surprised? I'm not surprised. I'm deciding whether to interfere. Don't. Excellent. Heater work? Violently. He nodded toward the older Ford. Good engine. Thank you. Bad transmission. Go home. Instead, he helped her unload discounted floor plank from the bed. The mill was beginning to collect evidence of intention. Stacked lumber, labeled machine parts, coils of new rope, orange flags Nora had placed along the bank. None of it made the wheel more capable of turning. All of it made abandonment harder. The main shaft yielded another fraction after 3 days of oil and careful pressure. Elias taught Mara to read the resistance through the lever. A hard stop meant they had reached damage or obstruction. A slow, elastic complaint meant old grease and corroded metal were giving reluctantly. "Never fall in love with movement," he said. "A thing can move right before it breaks. You should embroider that on a pillow. I'm saving it for wedding vows." They gained less than half an inch of rotation before the wheel side bearing tightened again. Elias stopped the attempt. Mara wanted one more pull. The urge sat in her shoulders like an itch. He saw it. "No, I didn't say anything. You leaned. I'm standing. You're arguing with your spine." She released the lever. That afternoon, Nora brought a preliminary drawing for the intake. It showed a screened opening at the existing headrace, a modest control gate set above the ordinary channel bed, and a bypass that allowed most water to continue through the natural bend. Nothing crossed the entire channel. Nothing attempted to force the river into its former industrial arrangement. "This isn't a buildable plan," Nora warned. "It's a concept to take into review. How much flow? At the levels we've observed, perhaps enough for 5 to 8 kilowatts of mechanical power at good efficiency. Less in summer, none during closure periods, or very low flow." Elias whistled softly. "That's useful." "It is not an estimate you should take to a bank," Nora said. "I don't own a bank. Do you know what I mean?" Mara traced the line of the headrace on the drawing. Could the old stones remain? Most should. That's preferable to rebuilding the race. The eroded section near the bend needs protection, and we may have to raise the intake lip to reduce sediment. What about the bank? Live willow stakes, choir fabric, anchored logs where scour is worst. You have enough room to lay the bank back slightly without moving the race wall. How much can we do ourselves? Nora looked at Mara's taped knuckles. "More than I recommend." The next interruption came in Owen's voice from outside. "Mara?" She stepped out. Owen stood beside a man in an orange vest carrying a rolled survey map. Behind them, a compact excavator sat on a trailer at the edge of the county road. Owen introduced the man as Rick Danner, the contractor hired to repair drainage near the farm's lower field before the new owners took possession. Rick was lean, gray-bearded, and immediately more interested in Nora's bank flags than in anyone's family history. "The old farm ditch outlets above the road," he explained. "Culvert carries it under, but the downstream swale's choked. We need to get the excavator down to clear it." "Down where?" Mara asked. Owen pointed along her mill track. "And you didn't call." "I did. You texted. Need to talk about access." That was the call before the call. That's not how phones work. Rick unrolled his map against the hood of Owen's truck. The proposed route crossed Mara's narrow upper strip, skirted the workshop, and passed within 15 feet of the raw bank Nora was trying to stabilize. "No," Mara said. Owen looked up. "He hasn't shown you the work. An excavator cannot use that route. The ground's saturated." "I'd lay mats," Rick said. "The outer bank is already losing soil. I won't put weight on the edge." Nora joined them and examined the map. "Where does the cleared swale discharge?" Rick pointed to a low area upstream of the mill parcel. "Here, then, through the roadside culvert." "Into the reactivated channel," Nora said. "It always drained downhill. Before the breach, that runoff spread through the abandoned bend. Now it has direct transport into moving water." Owen crossed his arms. "What does that mean?" "It means clearing it without erosion controls could send sediment straight past Mara's intake and into the river. There is no intake." "There may be," Mara said. Owen looked from her to the concept drawing in Nora's hand. "You're really doing this. I'm finding out if I can. And until then, the farm can't fix its drainage?" "I didn't say that." "You said no before Rick finished." "To this route. There isn't another practical route. The field is too soft from above." Mara studied the map. A second path approached from the road shoulder but required more matting and handwork near the culvert. It would cost more. Owen followed her gaze. The buyers already negotiated repairs into the closing, he said. Diane and I are responsible for delivering them. Then deliver them without damaging my bank. Your bank didn't exist as a bank a week ago. It was still my ground that nobody could use. Mara felt Nora and Rick become professionally interested in everything except the conversation. Owen lowered his voice. You are holding up the farm sale over a mill that may never run. The sale closed. Funds are held until the work is complete. There was the worry beneath his anger. Owen had counted on the money to pay his mortgage. Diane had counted on every final detail being contained. Then you should have planned the work before selling, Mara said. His face changed. You wanted more time to look at a lease. Remember? Every day mattered, according to you. Now you're happy to delay because you finally have leverage. This isn't leverage. You own a strip of mud everyone has to cross, and suddenly it's sacred. She has an active erosion risk, Nora said. Owen did not look at her. This was supposed to be our heritage, Mara, not your checkpoint. You sold the heritage. I sold land none of us could afford to keep, and left me the part you thought was worthless. So now we're all required to treat it like a cathedral. No, treat it like mine. The words silenced him. Rick rolled the map halfway closed, then opened it again. There's a third option. They all turned. I can work from the road if we use a smaller machine and a vacuum truck for the blocked section. Costs more. Takes 2 days. We install silt fence and a sediment trap before clearing. How much more? Owen asked. Rick named a figure. Owen swore under his breath. Mara looked at the original route. The track could tolerate limited access once the bank dried and the braces were protected, but not the compact excavator now. She did not want refusal to become revenge simply because revenge had briefly felt warm. What if Rick uses the road approach for the culvert, she said, and later crosses my track on mats for the lower handwork only? No excavator, no spoil stored here, and Nora approves the erosion controls. Owen's expression remained hard. You'll allow that? In writing, for these 2 days? Not permanent access. He looked almost disappointed to lose the cleaner argument. Rick nodded. Works for me. Nora added 2 conditions regarding refueling and the bank flags. Rick accepted both without complaint. Owen stared at the river. Grandma let the farm use this track whenever it needed. Grandma owned the farm, Mara said, and she asked me before anyone brought equipment past the workshop. You're making me ask. Yes. He met her eyes. Fine. I'm asking. Mara held his gaze a moment longer. Then yes, with the conditions, we said. Rick began revising the map. Owen walked toward the headrace alone. Water passed over the old stone center channel, clear enough to show every fitted edge. He stood there until his shoulders lowered. I shouldn't have called it worthless, he said without turning. You didn't. I thought it. Mara folded Nora's concept, drawing along its original crease. That was expensive enough. A gust moved through the bare maples. Upstream, clouds had gathered over the hills, low and dark against the late afternoon. Nora checked the weather on her phone. More rain, Mara asked. Warm rain. Fast snowmelt at elevation. Elias looked toward the breach. The headrace carried a steady current beneath the amber workshop lamp, but Mara could already imagine it rising against the marks on Nora's stakes. How long? She asked. Tomorrow night, likely. Mara looked at the raw bank, the temporary braces, and the brush beginning to gather again at the mouth of the wheel bay. This time, the river had given them notice. Mara called Warren before he could call her. I need tomorrow, she said. You needed last Friday. I know, and the boiler inspection is at 10. I left the maintenance log updated. The replacement valve is on your desk. Ray can meet the inspector. Ray thinks a shutoff valve is a personal criticism. I'll talk him through it tonight. Warren sighed. Mara heard a drawer close. You have no paid emergency time left. Then don't pay me. That isn't the favor you think it is. It isn't a favor. You keep saying that about things costing you money. He gave her the day on the condition that she cover Saturday and Sunday. Mara agreed before he finished the sentence. Elias arrived with additional cable and a gasoline-powered pump they did not use because Nora said pumping against a river was like emptying a bathtub with the faucet open. She allowed them to reinforce the existing relief path, protect exposed soil with weighted fabric, and stack filled sandbags near the workshop. Near, she emphasized, not in the channel. You are not building a dam by accident. How does one accidentally build a dam? Elias asked, usually while insisting they're doing something else. Tom Rusk brought 40 empty feed sacks. Celia came with a roll of heavy tarp and stayed to help Mara move the new floor planks above Ruth's bench. June arrived near noon with coffee, bread, and no intention of lifting anything heavier than the coffee. I use my back for money, she said. You people use yours recreationally. She cut thick slices of rye bread on the workbench while Elias inspected the outer wall. Your flour? Mara asked. Some of it. What's wrong with the rest? Nothing. But if you're going to mill for me, you should learn. I answer honest questions honestly. The loaf was dense, sour, and still warm in the center. Mara ate standing beside the open workshop wall, watching clouds close over the valley. Owen came down the track carrying a bundle of new sandbags. Mara checked the road behind him. Where's the excavator? Rick's using the road approach like we agreed. He finished the sediment trap this morning. We? You, mostly. He dropped the bags near the pile. Diane said you'd be here alone tonight. I won't be alone. Owen looked at Elias, Tom, Celia, and June around the workshop. Apparently. June handed him bread. Eat before someone gives you a shovel. I brought gloves. Then eat quickly. By mid-afternoon, the mill parcel looked prepared in every way that did not involve controlling the weather. The wheel bay had a cable ready for debris removal. The upstream corner stood on reinforced cribbing. Tools, records, and electrical cords were above the expected water line. Mara's packed bag waited beside the door. Nora walked the bank one final time and marked the second stone course with orange paint. If water reaches here, everyone leaves, she said. What about the jam? Mara asked. At that level, the jam belongs to the river. You really know how to create ownership clarity, Owen said. Nora pointed at him. You leave too. I gathered. She made Mara repeat the rule before driving upstream to inspect another vulnerable crossing. Rain began at dusk. It struck the metal roof softly at first, then settled into a steady rush that blurred the trees across the channel. The snow remaining in the woods did not melt visibly. It simply diminished, feeding water into every hollow and ditch. Tom, Celia, and June left before dark. Elias refused until Mara reminded him that his night vision was poor. My night vision is distinguished, he said. You mistook the tarp for your coat. It was the same color. One was silver. Owen took Elias's truck keys from the bench. I'll drive him. You can follow me back in my truck. Elias objected for 3 full minutes, then accepted because Mara threatened to call Nora. You've weaponized government, he told her. Nora would be proud. Owen returned 40 minutes later in dry clothes and old chest waders. Water already covered the bottom of the headgate lever. You didn't have to come back, Mara said. You said that last time. You came back anyway. I learned selectively. They worked beneath portable lights, checking the sandbag line and using the pike pole to pull branches away before they reached the wheel bay. Rain ran down Mara's neck. Owen's waders were too large, and every step produced a rubber sigh. At 10, Diane's SUV stopped above the mud. She walked down carrying 2 insulated jugs and wearing Ruth's old rubber boots. Mara recognized the boots by the strip of red tape around the right ankle. I thought those were thrown away. Diane looked down. The soles were splitting. Elias repaired them. When? He left them on my porch with a note that said, Fashion lost. Owen took one of the jugs. Coffee? Soup? You brought drinkable soup? I brought soup in a container. That wasn't my question. Diane handed Mara a dry towel and examined the rising race. She had pinned her hair up, but rain had loosened gray strands around her face. The buyers agreed to Rick's revised plan, she said. How much did it add? Mara asked. Diane named the figure. Mara winced. We'll cover it from the repair holdback, Diane said. I can contribute something. No, it is farm work. The clear boundaries sounded unfamiliar in Diane's mouth. Water surged over the overflow notch and raced through the relief path. The fabric along the raw bank held, though muddy water squeezed beneath its lower edge. Mara photographed the water line for Nora, then checked the wheel bay. The first large branch arrived shortly before midnight. It struck the plywood debris shield and lodged crosswise. Smaller sticks gathered immediately. Owen brought the cable while Mara used the pike pole from the upper sill. Not from there, he said. The plank's wet. I need the angle. You said everything here has a preferred way to injure you. That plank prefers splinters. Mara. She moved onto the stone apron and hooked the branch from the side. Owen passed the cable loop around it. They attached the winch and peeled it away from the bay. The branch came free, spun in the current, and jammed farther downstream against the tail race wall. Improvement? Owen asked. Different problem. They pulled it out from the lower bank. The rain intensified. So did the debris. For 2 hours, they dragged spruce limbs, brush, and one section of fence from the race. Diane stood in the workshop doorway, keeping the coffee hot and calling waterline measurements to Nora by phone. She never told Mara to stop. Mara noticed the restraint because it cost Diane visibly. At 1:30, a raft of branches struck the shield all at once. The impact shook the workshop floor. Water climbed the plywood, spraying through gaps into the covered bay. Behind it, the wheel remained still. Owen stared through the inspection door. That's a lot of pressure. We have to peel the top. Nora said no at the orange line. It's below the line. By what, an inch? An inch counts, not if it's moving. The mark stood just above the water, flickering in their lights. Mara clipped the safety line to her belt. Owen caught her wrist. No, let go. You can't reach it from dry stone. I can from the sill. That is not dry stone. The jam shuddered. One end rose, then slammed back. If it takes the shield, Mara said, it hits the wheel. And if it takes you? She looked at his hand around her wrist. He released her, but stepped between her and the sill. I'll go, he said. You don't know where to step. Then neither of us goes. It was infuriating because it was sensible. Mara ran the pike pole out as far as it would reach. The hook caught a high limb. Owen braced behind her, both hands on the shaft. Together they pulled until the limb bent toward them. Diane looped the cable around it from the workshop opening. Without stepping onto the sill, they tightened the winch. The top layer broke away. A dozen branches shot through the open side of the race and disappeared downstream. Water dropped against the shield. The remaining jam shifted toward the relief path. Mara and Owen peeled it piece by piece, never leaving the upper apron. It was slower than entering the water. It also worked. At 3, part of the outer bank collapsed. The sound was not dramatic. Mud simply folded into the current below the fabric, taking 2 sandbags and one of Nora's stakes. The water widened into the missing section and began scouring toward the stacked cribbing. Mara ran for more bags. Owen caught the first one from her. Where? Back from the edge. Curved toward the tail race. They built the line Elias had shown her. Diane filled bags in the lean-to, ruining her gloves and one knee of her trousers. Owen carried them. Mara placed them, each one flattening against the next. The current reached the new line and turned. Not entirely, not obediently, but enough. Near dawn, the rain thinned. The water stopped a finger's width below the orange mark. Mara stood in the workshop doorway, too tired to feel relief. Mud coated her jacket and dried in streaks on her face. Owen sat on the overturned bucket. Chest waders creased around him. Diane leaned against Ruth's bench with both hands around a mug. The braces still held. The wheel had not moved. The bank had lost 6 feet of soil, and one lower race stone had shifted out of line. Owen stared at the water. "I thought you were exaggerating." "About what?" "All of it." Mara waited for him to add something that would make the admission easier for himself. He did not. Diane opened the remaining jug and poured soup into 3 mugs. "This has noodles," she warned. "At breakfast?" Owen asked. "It was dinner when I made it. They drank anyway." As daylight gathered, headlights appeared on the track. Tom arrived first with more sacks. Celia followed in Elias's van, Elias glowering from the passenger seat because she had refused to let him drive. June came last, carrying a cardboard tray of hot biscuits. No one had been called. They walked to the damaged bank, inspected the shifted stone, and began asking what needed doing. Mara looked around the narrow parcel. There were no speeches, no promises, and no one pretending the storm had been a victory. They were tired adults in wet boots, confronting a longer list than the one they had started with. Elias studied the surviving cribbing. "Ugly," he said. "It held," Mara replied. "That's the first duty of ugly." He looked toward the wheel bay. The debris shield had split down the center, but the old wheel stood untouched behind it. "Building first," Mara said. Elias nodded. "Bank second." Nora's truck came down the track. Mara watched the returned water moving through the damaged race, then added, "and the river," before either one. Nora did not praise the sandbag line. She stood above the missing section of bank with rainwater dripping from her cap and said, "You kept the building from becoming part of the channel." "That sounds almost positive," Owen said. "It is positive. The bank still failed." She photographed the exposed soil, measured from the nearest maple, and inspected the shifted race stone without touching it. The collapse had widened the bend, but had not undercut the workshop cribbing. Muddy water from the farm drainage remained contained behind Rick's sediment trap. "That work happened at the right time," Nora said. Owen glanced at Mara. "The expensive route." "The correct route," Mara replied. He accepted the distinction. Nora marked a new line several feet back from the raw edge. The damaged slope would have to be laid back and stabilized rather than filled to its former shape. Anchored choir rolls could protect the water line, while willow stakes and native shrubs established roots above them. The race wall could be reset by hand under low-flow conditions, provided no one extended it into the channel. "And the intake plan?" Mara asked. "Waits. For how long? Until this is stable enough that adding controlled flow won't worsen the bend." Mara looked at the concept drawing folded inside her jacket. Nora softened slightly. "The river showed you where the first design was weak. Better now than after construction. It charged tuition. They all do." The others began clearing the storm debris. Owen lifted a feed sack and stopped when Diane took the other end. "You're staying?" he asked. "For an hour. You have the house." "I have spent a month having the house." She carried the sack toward the pile without waiting for him. Her hour became 3. She worked in Ruth's repaired boots, gathering branches and writing down the damaged materials as Mara called them out. No one had asked her to keep an inventory. It was simply the form her usefulness took. When she left, she paused beside Mara at the workshop door. "The buyers take possession tomorrow," she said. "I know. I'll be finished by noon. You don't need help? Everything remaining fits in my vehicle." The cedar chest did not fit in Diane's SUV, but Mara did not point that out. At 11 the next morning, she walked uphill and found Diane alone in the empty kitchen. The blue Dutch oven sat on the counter beside a cardboard box. Sunlight reached places furniture had hidden for decades. Diane held the farmhouse keys in her palm. "They're early," she said. "The buyers. Do you want me to stay?" "No." Mara stayed. They stood on the porch while a moving truck turned into the drive. A silver-haired couple climbed out of an SUV and waved with the careful warmth of people meeting grief on property they had paid for. Diane handed over the keys, answered a question about the propane tank, and wished them happiness in the house. Her voice did not break until they reached Mara's old truck. "I forgot the chest. It's on Owen's trailer." Diane looked toward the barn. "He came? At 9. He didn't tell me. He may have learned something about asking." Diane pressed her lips together. Mara opened the passenger door. "I can drive you. It's downhill. You're carrying a Dutch oven. That is not a disability. No, but it's a terrible way to discover one." Diane let Mara take the box. They walked down the county road together. Behind them, strangers opened the farmhouse door. Ahead, the mill roof appeared through the bare maples, silver patches catching the sun. Water flashed beside it. Diane did not look back again. The bank work began as soon as the ground could hold them. Nora secured approval for the emergency stabilization method and spent a Saturday teaching Mara, Owen, Tom, and Celia how to set choir rolls along the water line. They drove untreated stakes through the heavy fiber cylinders and packed native soil behind them. Above, they inserted bundles of dormant willow cuttings deep enough to remain damp. "They look dead," Owen said. "They're dormant," Nora replied. "I also look like that before coffee. You're less useful for erosion control." June established a food table inside the workshop and enforced breaks by threatening to withhold lunch. Elias sat on a stool near the open wall, shaping replacement blocking and pretending his back was not the reason Mara had assigned him bench work. By evening, the raw bank had become a broad, protected slope. It looked bare and temporary, the willow stakes no more promising than broom handles. "What if they don't take?" Mara asked. "We replace the failures," Nora said. "And if the choir rolls shift, we reset them. And if the channel moves again, we adapt." Mara glanced at her. "Do you ever answer with something finished?" Watersheds aren't finished. The mill was not either. Mara's plywood budget filled with revised numbers. The bank work consumed most of the cash she had left from selling her truck. The structural repairs exceeded everyone's first estimate. The intake required engineering she could not yet afford. Even with volunteer labor, food-safe milling space remained a distant column. At the next meeting in Elias's shop, she laid the figures before June, Tom, and Celia. "I can stabilize the building," Mara said. "I can probably restore the line shaft in one stone with a small loan. The intake and wheel work have to be phased. I can't promise an operating date." Tom read the page twice. "What are you asking from us?" "I don't know if I should ask anything yet." "Then why are we meeting?" June said. "Elias said I needed commitments before the community cooperative would consider financing." Elias, sanding an applewood gear tooth at the far bench, did not look up. Celia tapped the workshop column. "If we form a cooperative, who owns the mill?" "I do." "And the equipment?" "Existing equipment stays with the property. Anything the cooperative buys belongs to the cooperative. What happens if you sell? I don't plan to." "That is not an answer," Celia said. Mara felt defensive, then recognized the question as one she would have asked. "We write a lease," she said, "long enough to protect member investments. Any sale remains subject to it." Tom leaned back. "And if the river dries up?" "We use grid power for necessary processing or suspend water-powered work. The plan cannot depend on full flow every day." "Rates?" "By batch for grain." "Monthly membership for workshop users?" "Volunteer hours reduce some fees, not all. The mill still has bills when people feel generous." June smiled. "You've been practicing." On the drive here, they argued for 2 hours. Tom wanted guaranteed storage space Mara did not have. Celia objected to paying the same workshop fee in months when water power was limited. June refused to call anything artisanal because, in her words, that's how flour learns to cost $12. No one rescued the idea from difficulty. By the end, June committed to 6 months of small rye batches if the mill passed inspection and produced consistent flour. Tom agreed to provide grain for test milling at cost and pay a founding share in 2 installments. Celia pledged a founding share and 40 hours of skilled restoration work in exchange for reduced workshop fees during the first year. Elias placed a 1-page form in front of Mara. "What's this?" "My membership." You own a cabinet shop. I also own an old lathe I'd like to run without listening to the electric meter scream. His founding payment was modest. So were all of them. Together they did not buy a new wheel, but they turned interest into obligations people had chosen. The Valley Community Cooperative approved Mara's loan 3 weeks later, contingent on proof of insurance, the member commitments, and a repair budget Elias helped her divide into phases. It was smaller than she requested. That may be a blessing, Diane said when Mara told her. It comes with interest. That's not the usual blessing structure. It limits what you can lose. It also limits what I can fix. Diane folded a dish towel at the table in her apartment. The cedar chest stood against the far wall, too large for the room and exactly where she wanted it. Then fix the part that earns enough to fix the next part, she said. Mara looked at her aunt. That almost sounded encouraging. Don't become reckless. There you are. The first loan payment would begin before the mill produced anything. Mara kept her maintenance job, worked every weekend Warren offered, and learned to sleep through the headrace's steady noise. In the evenings, she and Elias replaced the damaged sill section a few feet at a time. They jacked the workshop corner barely enough to remove the rot, fitted new timber to old, and lowered the building onto sound wood. The grinding floor came next. Mara removed failed boards, vacuumed decades of flour dust from the joist pockets, and installed safe walkways. Celia repaired guards for the pulleys. Tom built grain bin platforms. June scrubbed the future clean room, then declared the walls unsuitable and made everyone scrub them again. Owen came after work twice a week. He never offered money again. He lifted, hauled, and learned to ask where a tool belonged before setting it down. The willows along the bank opened their first pale leaves. Water remained in the historic bend as spring lowered toward summer. The headrace carried less than it had during the flood, but enough for Nora's measuring instrument to confirm useful flow. Inside, the main shaft turned by hand through a quarter rotation, then half. Each gain revealed another hard place. Elias cleaned the bearing journals with strips of oiled cloth, while Mara worked the padded lever. On a warm evening in May, the shaft completed one full, slow revolution. No one cheered until Elias said, "Again." They turned it a second time. The great gear carried its missing teeth past Mara's shoulder, every damaged section marked in chalk. Above them, the empty pulleys moved together without belts. Mara laughed. Owen did too. Elias put one hand against the shaft and closed his eyes, feeling for heat that was not there. Then he climbed down to inspect the wheel side bearing. His flashlight remained fixed on the axle end for too long. "What?" Mara asked. He reached into the housing and pulled out a sliver of dark wood soft enough to bend between his fingers. The shaft inside the mill was sound. Where it entered the damp wheel bay, hidden behind the iron collar, the axle had rotted. "How bad?" Owen asked. Elias did not answer until he had probed the full circumference. "Bad enough we don't turn it again." The pulleys above them slowed to a stop. Mara stared at the bright chalk marks they had carried through one complete circle. "What fixes it?" "A new axle end fitted to the old shaft, iron sleeve, custom work." "How much?" Elias looked at the budget board below. "More future money," he said. Mara did not ask how much again. She went downstairs, erased the second millstone from the first repair phase, and drew a line through half the workshop improvements. The axle end repair still did not fit. Elias followed her down more slowly. "You can delay the clean room," he said. "Then June can't use the flour. You can delay workshop power. Then Celia's membership buys her an expensive chair. You can ask the cooperative to revise commitments. I can ask them to pay more for something that works less. You can ask," Elias said. "Adults may refuse without the sky falling." Mara put down the chalk. Ruth would have found a way. Ruth sometimes found a way by not paying herself. She wasn't paying herself anyway. "That isn't admirable, Mara." The sharpness in his voice stopped her. Elias rested both hands on Ruth's bench. She'd take a job that should cost $1,000 and make it happen for $200, then act offended when the next failure didn't respect her sacrifice. That is not a restoration method. You said the axle can be repaired. It can. So teach me. He looked toward the ceiling where the damaged shaft waited above them. I know the woodwork, he said. The iron sleeve goes to a machine shop. The lift needs rigging. I won't improvise. We pay for what requires paying. And the rest? We reduce scope, add time, or stop. The last word remained between them. Mara had imagined quitting as something done in anger. Tools thrown down, doors slammed, the mill sold before regret caught up. Elias made it sound quieter, a decision written beside numbers, an honest limit. Her phone rang. Diane asked Mara to meet her at the diner after work. She would not say why. They sat in a booth beneath a framed photograph of the town before its traffic light. Diane ordered tea and did not drink it. An envelope lay beside her hand. If that contains a list, Mara said, I'm leaving. It contains an offer. For what? The mill parcel. Mara leaned back. The farm buyers remain interested, Diane said. They increased what they are willing to pay. I would purchase it from you first, settle your cooperative loan and other debts, then convey it to them. Why would you put yourself between us? Because they don't want an operating mill across the road. You don't want to bargain with them. I can give both sides certainty. You can give yourself control. Diane looked down at the envelope. I can give you enough for a proper apartment and savings. You already planned the apartment. I have revised the imaginary floor plan. Despite herself, Mara almost smiled. Diane pushed the envelope across the table. You do not have to read this now. I know what numbers look like. The axle repair changes your budget, Owen told me. Owen needs to learn which conversations aren't his. He was worried, so he outsourced it. Mara, please look at the offer. She opened the envelope. The number was higher than the mill's old appraised value and lower than the land might be worth to buyers who wanted control over what happened below their farm. It would clear the loan, her credit cards, and the truck balance. There would be enough left to breathe. Diane had made surrender look responsible down to the dollar. If I accept, Mara said, what happens to the building? They would stabilize or remove it according to whatever approvals are required. Remove it. I did not say that. You didn't have to. Diane's fingers tightened around the untouched tea. I am trying to offer you a door before the room becomes too expensive to leave. You put me in the room. Ruth put the mill in her will. You told everyone it was generous. I was wrong. The admission came without decoration. Mara closed the envelope. Diane continued, I thought you would sell immediately. I thought assigning a positive value would help you accept that. It allowed the rest of the estate to close cleanly. Cleanly for Owen. And for me. The diner's refrigerator compressor started behind the counter. Silverware clattered in the kitchen. You expected the poorest heir to surrender first, Mara said. Diane flinched but did not deny it. I expected the heir with the least margin for error to choose safety. You didn't ask what safety looked like to me? No. Mara slid the offer back. I'm not signing. You have not reviewed the terms. I reviewed the property. Diane's face closed, then reopened with effort. Are you refusing because the mill can work, or because selling would let us be right? The question hurt because Mara had asked herself a quieter version at 3 a.m. I'm refusing because 4 people have committed money and work, because the bank is stable, because the shaft turned, because Nora has a lawful intake plan, and because I'm allowed to find out whether the work is useful without you translating every risk into a reason I should disappear. The axle. Come to the cooperative meeting Sunday. Diane blinked. Why? If you still think this is Ruth spending grocery money on shingles, come watch us argue over depreciation. I don't belong there. You keep trying to buy the building. Earn an opinion. Diane attended in a navy coat, carrying a legal pad. The meeting took place on the grinding floor now that the safe planks had become a full walkway. June brought rye rolls. Tom brought revised grain figures. Celia brought a proposed workshop schedule with color-coded blocks that Elias called hostile to spontaneity. They discussed the axle repair first. The machine shop quote included a new iron sleeve and gudgeon, but the timber splice and rigging would come from cooperative labor under Elias's direction. To cover the cost, they could defer restoration of the second stone, reduce the initial grain storage capacity, and postpone power to the largest workshop pulley. June accepted one stone if batch cleaning remained separate. Tom gave up his demand for permanent storage and agreed to scheduled delivery. Celia accepted limited machine hours and offered another 20 labor hours rather than additional cash. "What happens if costs rise again?" Diane asked. "We stop at the next safe phase," Mara said. "And loan payments? My maintenance wages cover them at current terms. Mill revenue will reimburse labor and build reserves before it pays me." Diane wrote something down. "So you continue working 2 jobs, 1.5 if this begins earning. That is how bad arithmetic introduces itself." June leaned across the table. "Then we review after 3 months. If milling can't cover operating expenses, we don't pretend." Tom nodded. "My commitment is for test grain, not permanent acreage." Celia pointed at the schedule. "Workshop membership begins only after usable power exists." No one sounded enchanted. Diane looked around at the repaired floor, the labeled pulley guards, and the budget sheets clipped to a board. "You all know this may fail," she said. Elias tore a roll in half. "Knowing is why it has a chance not to." Diane did not apologize again. Before leaving, she removed the sale offer from her bag and tore it once across the signature line. "I can get another copy," she said when Mara looked at her. "This is not theater." "Then why tear it?" "I disliked carrying it." That was as close as Diane came to admitting she no longer wanted Mara to sign. The axle came out in sections of work measured by inches. They built a rated lifting frame, rented chain hoists, and raised the shaft just enough to free the damaged bearing. Elias cut away the rotted end until they reached sound wood. Mara shaped the replacement timber under his instruction, checking the fit so many times that Celia threatened to hide the measuring tools. The joint used long interlocking faces drawn tight beneath the custom iron sleeve. Nothing about it was concealed. Its strength came from surface, fit, and pressure spread across more wood than the rot had taken. When the sleeve arrived, black and heavy from the machine shop, the invoice made Mara's stomach hurt. They installed it anyway. Elias guided the gudgeon into the rebuilt bearing. His hands shook slightly when he reached for the final shim. Mara took it from him. "Tell me." He showed her how to read the gap, where to tap, when to stop. "I should have come back before Ruth died," he said quietly. Mara kept her eyes on the shim. "Yes. I thought she'd call. She thought you would. Stubborn woman, 2 of you." He gave the shim one last tap. 3. They lowered the shaft onto the bearing. It sat level. The wheel itself required 31 new buckets, 6 frame repairs, and more ironwork than the budget allowed until Owen spent 2 weekends helping Mara salvage usable straps from the failed sections. He cleaned each piece with a wire wheel, marked cracks in red, and asked Elias before discarding anything. Diane began coming on Sundays. She scrubbed ledger dust from the office shelves, typed invoices into a spreadsheet, and complained about everyone's receipts. $8 for pencils? She demanded. "Carpenter pencils," Celia said. "Do they build anything?" "They survive being sat on. The willows rooted. Summer leaves hid most of the raw bank." Nora inspected after 2 heavy rains and found no new scour beneath the choir rolls. The channel ran lower but steady, moving enough water through the bend to keep the headrace alive. The revised intake plan passed review after changes to the screen spacing and high water bypass. Nora helped Mara mark the exact footprint. A licensed engineer checked the head, the gate forces, and the bank loads, then stamped the drawings only after making Elias replace 3 assumptions with measurements. They built the low intake during the driest week of August. The structure guided only a limited portion of flow into the stone headrace. Most water continued through the historic bend. The new gate sat within repaired stonework and connected to Ruth's iron lever after Mara cleaned, straightened, and rebushed its pivot. For the first time since dawn after the flood, the lever moved. Mara pulled it through its range with no water against the gate. The iron arm rose, paused, and lowered with a heavy, controlled grace. "Don't get sentimental," Elias said. "I'm checking resistance." "You're smiling at resistance." Above the wheel bay, they completed the guards, aligned the shaft, and fitted the last applewood gear tooth. June and Tom cleaned the single restored stone and housing until Elias complained they were removing historically important dirt. The first water test was set for a Monday morning when Nora could monitor flow and the engineer could inspect the gate under load. No grain would enter the stone. No workshop machines would be belted. They would turn only the repaired wheel and unloaded shaft. On Sunday evening, everyone left early at Mara's request. She walked the mill alone, touching each guard and checking each bearing cap. The grinding floor smelled of clean wood, oil, and the faint mineral scent of dressed stone. Below, the amber workshop lamp shone across Ruth's bench. Outside, the headrace ended at the closed gate. Beyond it, the river passed through the old bend beneath late summer leaves. Mara wrapped one hand around the mud-stained iron lever, clean now except for the marks that would not polish away. Tomorrow she would lift it. For the first time since the river returned, the wheel was ready to answer. Mara woke before the alarm. The room above the workshop was cold enough that her breath showed. She dressed by the blue light at the window, braided her hair, and pulled on the dark teal jacket she had worn the morning the river returned. Below, the amber lamp cast its familiar circle over Ruth's bench. Outside, the historic bend moved quietly beneath the trees. Late summer had thinned the river, leaving damp lines on the fitted stones of the headrace, but the channel still carried more than Nora required for the test. Water pressed against the closed gate without spilling over it. Mara laid one hand on the iron lever. Months earlier, she had stood in nearly the same place, gripping the same arm while floodwater forced its way past a gate that no longer existed. The river had chosen the mill then. Today, for the first time, Mara would choose how much of the river entered. Tires sounded on the track. Elias arrived first, carrying an infrared thermometer, a canvas tool roll, and coffee in a metal flask. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some. Eat? Eventually. That isn't how breakfast works." He handed her a biscuit wrapped in waxed paper. While she ate, he checked every bearing for oil, every guard for fasteners, and every wedge in the rebuilt gear. Mara followed with the written checklist. Neither trusted memory on a morning when wanting could make anything look ready. Nora came with her flow meter and waterproof tablet. The engineer followed and inspected the gate mechanism, axle repair, and bypass one final time. Owen's truck rolled in behind him, with Diane in the passenger seat. June, Tom, and Celia parked above the workshop to leave the track clear. No one brought a ribbon. June brought another bag of biscuits. "I was told there had already been a biscuit," she said, looking at Elias. "It was medicinal," he replied. "They're all medicinal." Nora measured the flow through the natural bend and confirmed that opening the intake to the test mark would leave the required amount in the bypass. "You raise the gate only to the blue line," she told Mara. "If the wheel overspeeds, if the bank shows new movement, or if Elias tells you to stop, close it." "What if you tell me?" "I'll tell Elias. You seem to enjoy arguing with me." "I don't enjoy it." Nora smiled. Blue line. Everyone moved to assigned positions. Elias and the engineer stood at the wheel side bearing. Celia watched the upper shaft. Tom remained beside the emergency stop rope connected to the gate mechanism. Nora took her place where she could see both the intake and the bypass. Owen and Diane stood outside the marked work area near the workshop door. Owen had his phone in his hand, but he was not recording. Mara wrapped her fingers around the lever. "Ready?" she called. "Ready," Elias answered from the bay. She pulled. The iron arm resisted at first, not from damage but from water pressing against the gate. Mara shifted her feet and applied steady pressure. The pivot moved. Beneath the surface, the new gate rose half an inch. Water slid into the headrace. It spread across the center channel, filling the low places first, then gathered depth as it moved toward the mill. Nothing about it resembled the violent wall of brown floodwater that had arrived in March. This water was cold, clear, and limited by a mark painted blue on an iron arm. "Keep going," Nora said. Mara raised the lever another inch. Water reached the covered wheel bay. Inside, the repaired buckets caught the first shallow flow. The wheel gave a wooden knock, but did not move. Mara watched Elias. He held up one hand. Wait. The headrace deepened. Water climbed against the lowest buckets. The wheel shuddered. Its rebuilt axle settled in the bearing with a sound like a door pressed firmly into its frame. Then the wheel turned. One bucket descended. Another rose, shining from the water. The great circle completed a single slow revolution and hesitated. Mara's grip tightened on the lever. "Hold there," Nora said. No one spoke. Water continued gathering against the buckets. The wheel moved again, more slowly at first, then carried its own weight past the high point. The second revolution flowed into the third. From inside the mill came a low sequence of clicks as the applewood teeth engaged the larger gear. The line shaft began to turn. One by one, the empty pulleys overhead joined the motion. They moved without belts or load, broad iron circles revolving in the dusty morning light. The wheel settled into a slow, steady rhythm that traveled through the timber frame and up beneath Mara's boots. The entire building breathed through the floor. Diane covered her mouth. Mara looked toward the workshop, expecting Ruth to appear beneath the amber lamp with a list of everything they had done incorrectly. No one came. The empty place hurt with such precision that Mara had to look down at her hand on the lever. Bearing temperature stable, Elias called. The engineer checked alignment. Celia reported no contact at the guards. Nora measured the bypass again and signaled that the river flow remained within the permitted limit. The wheel turned for 12 minutes. At the end of the test, Mara lowered the lever slowly. Water diminished in the headrace. The wheel completed 3 final revolutions and stopped with one wet bucket dripping into the bay. Silence returned in pieces. Elias rested his palm against the rebuilt axle sleeve. "Well?" Mara asked. He took out the thermometer, aimed it, and read the display. 4 degrees warmer than ambient. "Is that good?" "It's barely interesting." She laughed, and the sound broke whatever restraint had held the others. Tom clapped Owen on the shoulder. June hugged Celia, then Mara, leaving flour from the biscuit bag on her jacket. Diane remained near the workshop door, crying without attempting to hide or explain it. Owen came to stand beside Mara at the lever. "I remember the sound now," he said. "You said you didn't remember the channel." "I didn't. But that." He looked toward the wheel bay. "I remember feeling it through the floor at Grandma's. I thought it was trucks on the road. The wheel stopped before we were born. Then maybe she made me think I remembered. That also sounds like her." He watched the last water drain from the race. "I left you the part that needed everything," he said. Mara looked at him. "I told myself it was the part you wanted, but mostly it was the part I didn't want to be responsible for." "Yes." He nodded, taking the answer without asking her to make it gentler. "I'm sorry." Mara could have told him it was all right. It was not, and the wheel turning did not travel backward through time to make it so. "Keep showing up," she said. "I can do that. We'll find out." Behind them, Diane had composed herself enough to criticize the coffee. The loaded test came 10 days later. Tom delivered 400 pounds of rye in clean sacks, along with moisture readings Mara verified before accepting the grain. June stood beside the restored stone housing in a white apron, watching as if she expected one of the 19th century beams to violate a health code out of spite. The clean room had passed inspection after 3 additional rounds of sealing, scrubbing, and paperwork. The grain cleaner ran on grid power. The restored millstone would run from the line shaft. Mara opened the gate to the operating mark. The wheel took up its steady rhythm. Elias engaged the belt only after checking that everyone was clear. The pulley turned. The spindle carried motion down into the stone housing. Mara fed a small amount of rye into the hopper. The mill produced flour too coarse, then flour too warm. They stopped, reduced the feed, adjusted the stone gap, and tried again. On the 3rd attempt, pale rye flour fell into the collection bin in a soft, even stream. June rubbed a pinch between her fingers. "Well?" Mara asked. "It's flour. That sounds disappointed. I own a bakery. Flour is the goal." She tasted it, frowned thoughtfully, then held out her hand for more. Tom laughed. "That means she likes it. It means I am collecting data. Is the data good?" June brushed flour from her palm. "The data wants to be bread." The first batch took twice as long as Mara had estimated. The belt wandered once and had to be realigned. A grain gate jammed. Elias discovered a bearing that needed oil more often under load. The final yield was lower than Tom expected and more consistent than June feared. They wrote down every problem. 2 mornings later, June brought back 6 loaves made with the mill's rye flour. She sold them at her normal price and paid the invoice without requesting a family discount, historical discount, or emotional discount. Mara kept the first check pinned above Ruth's bench for 1 day before depositing it toward the loan. The cooperative did not become profitable because 1 batch worked. Autumn water was more reliable, but demand remained small. Tom delivered grain only when Mara had confirmed orders. June increased her rye purchases after 3 consistent batches, then reduced them in January when sales slowed. Celia used the workshop line shaft twice a week for her lathe and small planer, never at the same time as milling. On days when the river ran low, they closed the intake. On days when debris collected against the screen, Mara cleaned it from the bank with the long-handled rake Nora required. The choir rolls needed resetting after a November storm. 2 willow stakes failed and were replaced. The roof leaked above the old second stone, which remained unrestored. Nothing stopped needing work. Mara reduced her maintenance schedule at the apartment complex from 4 days to 3. Warren complained that she was the only employee who knew where the original plumbing plans were, then approved the change after making her label the cabinet. "You'll be back when the mill bankrupts you," he said. "Keep my name on a shirt. I'm charging storage." The mill paid Mara irregularly at first. Workshop memberships covered insurance and utilities. Milling fees handled operating costs and part of the loan. Her maintenance wages covered food, the old Ford's repairs, and everything else. She still lived above the workshop. The shower pipe still froze once, proving Diane right in a way Mara refused to report. Diane took over monthly cooperative bookkeeping only after Mara wrote into the minutes that financial administration did not grant operational control. "You put that in because of me," Diane said. "Yes, good." She kept the books within 3 cents and became unbearable over missing receipts. She never again suggested selling the parcel. She also never called her first plan cruel. The closest she came was one evening when they were sorting invoices. "I thought lack of money would make your decision for you," she said. "It almost did. I knew. That was the point." Diane aligned the invoice edges. Yes, the apology remained incomplete. Mara found she could live beside an incomplete thing if no one demanded she call it whole. Owen continued coming on Tuesdays. Sometimes he worked. Sometimes he drank coffee in the workshop and complained about his commute. When the new farm owners needed to inspect the lower drainage, he gave them Mara's number instead of answering for her. They called, asked permission, and later bought 2 sacks of buckwheat flour from the cooperative. The farm remained theirs. Mara stopped looking uphill every time a vehicle turned into its drive. At the next spring thaw, rain fell overnight onto the remaining snow. Mara woke to the deep rush beneath the floor and dressed before dawn. Outside, cold blue light lay across the river. Clean snow remnants clung beneath the bare maples. The historic bend rose hard and dark, but the stabilized bank held. Water passed around the low-impact intake as designed. The headgate screen carried a fringe of twigs that would need cleaning after breakfast. The mill stood above its wet stone foundation, weathered rather than transformed. New boards showed among old ones. The covered wheel bay remained dark, except when the wheel's wet buckets caught the workshop light. Mara opened the gate only to the safe high-water mark. The wheel began its steady turn. Inside, she switched on the amber lamp and hung her jacket beside Ruth's leather apron. The morning schedule listed Tom's rye at 8, Celia's workshop block at 1, and a bearing inspection before either. On the bench lay the maintenance ledger Diane had started for the cooperative. Mara opened it to a fresh page and recorded the river level, gate position, and screen condition. Beneath the entry, she wrote her initials, MB. For a moment, she listened to the mill carrying motion through its old, repaired frame. Ruth's chair remained empty. Grief had not left the room. It had learned to sit without owning every surface. Across the county road, another family's lights came on in the farmhouse. Mara saw them through the workshop window and felt no claim rise in her. The farm had been sold. The mill had been left to her because everyone thought leaving was the same as giving. They had been wrong about that. Mara closed the ledger, took the long-handled rake from its hook, and stepped toward the headrace as the wheel turned behind her. There was useful work waiting.